Chapter 238. The next morning, at the 2nd Military Base in the outskirts of New York. From time to time, military helicopters and transport aircrafts landed at the spacious airport. Elite soldiers from all over the United States gathered together. Under the sun, their strong arms were bare, and they gathered together in teams to discuss and talk. It was as if they were preparing to launch a secret war. A black military officer and a middle-aged general with white hair and beard stood on a low slope beside the airport. They were observing the elite soldiers that were gradually forming below. "General, I've gathered all the soldiers you've asked for. They're the best of the best. Of course, there is also a top-notch one." The black military officer showed his white teeth and said confidently, "Vroom vroom." Just then, a military helicopter landed slowly. All the soldiers and officers looked up and saw the door open. A blond young man was sitting on the seat beside the door. His face was indifferent and his hair was messy. One look and they could tell that he was a top-notch soldier. Emib Bronsky, born in Russia. He was seconded from the British Royal Marine Corps. He is the best all-around soldier in the world. The black military officer said proudly, "I believe that no one is more suitable than him to carry out the secret mission." "Joe. Don't speak too quickly. If you know that I successfully invited." Before General Thunderbolt could finish his words, he saw a private helicopter fly into the airport. There were clear logos of Stark Industries and Supernatural Organization on the fuselage. "He is here. Go over quickly." General Thunderbolt waved his hand and left the slope with a slightly excited expression. He jogged toward the airport and actually wanted to pick up the person himself. The black military officer was stunned for a moment and then hurriedly followed him. The private helicopter and the military helicopter landed almost at the same time. They were also the last batch of elite soldiers that had been gathered. As the organizer of this mission, General Joe, and the person in charge, General Thunderbolt, the two of them hurriedly appeared to pick up the person. This attracted the attention of all the soldiers present. Emib had just jumped out of the cabin with his satchel when he saw the famous Thunderbolt general walking towards him. No matter how tough he was, he still couldn't help but be shocked. "General." Emib stood up and saluted respectfully, but General Thunderbolt only nodded slightly and quickly walked past him to welcome the private helicopter that had landed on the ground. The cabin door opened, and a silver-haired young man slowly walked out. He was only wearing casual clothes with a hood, and he yawned in boredom. He didn't look like he was here to fight, but more like he was here for a vacation. However, the moment he appeared, the entire military base's airport fell silent. The soldiers and officers on the field all opened their mouths wide, revealing shocked and excited expressions. It was as if they had seen a living legend walking out of a precious military documentary file. After Cale contacted the owner of the email last night, he left Yutong at the new company in New York and brought Venom and Vice to the base alone to receive the invitation. As soon as he left the helicopter cabin, he saw a middle-aged general walking over. He asked, "Are you General Thunderbolt?" "General Thunderbolt, that's just a nickname given to me by others." General Thunderbolt held Cale's hand tightly. He lowered his posture and looked directly at him with slightly red eyes. "Mr. Cale. My name is Ross Taylor, you can call me Ross. I'm Joseph Taylor's son." "Joseph's son?" Kyle was stunned for a moment. A scene from 60 years ago flashed through his mind. It was a scene where a recruit and a combat instructor were sparring under the setting sun. He said emotionally, "It's been a long time. Is Joseph doing well?" "Father, he passed away 20 years ago." General Ross' eyes were slightly red. He looked at Cale sincerely and said, "Before he passed away, he often murmured your name in a daze. Unfortunately, I couldn't contact you at that time and couldn't let him see you one last time." Cale didn't say much. He patted General Ross' shoulder comfortingly and sighed softly. This was a normal human being. It was normal for them to grow old and die. Kale and General Ross chatted as they walked towards the office in the base. The black military officer was still standing on the airport in a daze. From the moment he saw Kale appear, he was like the soldiers around him, falling into a dreamy state. He actually invited the symbol of peace. Could this so-called secret mission be to destroy a country? The symbol of peace. Amib quietly clenched his fists. His eyes were dyed with a layer of gloominess. Even someone as proud as him had to lower his head at this moment. No matter what level he reached in the military, even if he was at the top level of soldiers in the world. But above this level, there was a whole new level. No soldier could chase or even touch it. They could only look up to it. In the general's office. After Kale sat down on the chair, General Ross closed the door. He took out a confidential document from the drawer and handed it over to him. Kale didn't stand on ceremony. He opened the document and flipped through it. It was information about a young man and a thick stack of confidential files. What you're holding now is Bruce Banner's personal file and the confidential file on the Hulk incident. General Ross explained simply, Bruce Banner was originally a biology professor at Culver University. He was in charge of the Biological Cell Technology Enhancement Project. Later, due to a biotechnology accident in the laboratory, he was exposed to a large amount of gamma radiation. His body mutated and he turned into the extremely powerful green creature in the video last night. We called it Hulk. Kale flipped through the document. There were a lot of pictures at the back. They all described the size of the army, where and when they fought with Hulk. In all the big and small battles, the military suffered a crushing defeat. In the pictures, regardless of whether it was tanks or fighter jets, they were all crushed and torn into a pile of scrap metal without exception. General Ross continued, after a few failed attempts to capture Hulk, he disappeared. In these 4 years, the military suspected that he had returned to his human form and was hiding in some corner of the world. You contacted me in such a hurry because you found him? Kale smiled and judged. That's right. General Ross nodded and said solemnly, 2 days ago, an old man bought a bottle of drink from Brazil in a supermarket in New York. He died on the spot after eating it. The doctor detected a very high level of gamma radiation in the drink. After sending people to investigate for 2 days, I'm certain that Hulk is hiding in Brazil. I've also basically confirmed the specific location. It's fine as long as you find him. Kale nodded and put down the document. He looked straight at General Ross and asked, Are you sure that you'll listen to my orders throughout this mission? Of course. General Ross nodded decisively. Good. Now, I'll give you my first order. Kale said in a low voice, For this mission, all combat personnel are listed as logistics. Evacuate and guide the ordinary people who may be affected. Chapter 239. In a cheap rental single room in the slums of Rocinha, Brazil. The decoration of the room was too old and simple. The walls were peeling due to old age, but the furniture was simple and neat. Under the dim light from the glass window, a young man with curly hair sat cross-legged on a small square straw mat. He was only wearing a pair of large underpants. He controlled his breathing evenly and began to lower his eyelids slowly. He practiced a breathing technique from Indian yoga, which was to use abdominal breathing to slow down his pulse and adjust his emotions. However, not long after he closed his eyes, his vision fell into endless darkness. A green monster trapped in the cage of his subconscious roared angrily at him. The powerful green and violent cells that filled his blood and genes were rapidly eroding and infecting other red blood cells. Huff, huff, the curly-haired young man began to pant rapidly. His face was slightly ferocious. The veins on his forehead were bulging and cold sweat poured out, drenching his entire body. Although he tried his best to suppress it, he was on the verge of losing control of his body. Don't come out. The curly-haired young man growled and suddenly opened his eyes. His hands were sweaty and tightly clenched. He hurriedly looked at his left wrist. There was a physical watch that monitored his heart rate. The number on it was over 200 and gradually decreased, approaching the normal number of 100. Here we go again. The curly-haired young man smiled bitterly. After hiding in Brazil for more than 3 years and mastering ancient yoga and integrating into the local life, as long as he controlled his emotions and did not get angry, he would not become Hulk who only knew how to fight and destroy. Now, it had been more than 100 days since he last transformed into Hulk. However, for some reason, during this period, Hulk, who had always been quiet, became more and more restless. He began to consciously break free and go to a certain place in the West. The West was America. In his hometown, there was the person he loved, a place that he missed but could not get close to. However, in the past 2 days, the curly-haired young man had a strong sense of uneasiness in his heart. It was as if there was something in America that attracted Hulk. His anger had reached the critical point of transformation many times. No matter what, I will not let you out, and I will not let you return to New York. The curly-haired young man took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He wiped the sweat on his body with a towel and continued to adjust his emotions while practicing Indian yoga. The tiger in my heart sniffs the rose. Whoever dares to provoke me will destroy the world. Over the vast ocean, on a giant American transport aircraft sailing in the direction of Brazil. Inside the cabin, the armed soldiers who were ready sat in rows of seats in silence. Although the mission's danger was greatly reduced after the combat classification was changed to reconnaissance and logistics, it still caused the elite soldiers to be slightly dissatisfied. Of course, if they knew what kind of enemy they were about to face, they probably wouldn't think so. From time to time, the armed soldiers would raise their heads and cast their gazes as if they were looking at an idol. There, accompanied by General Ross, was a silver-haired youth sitting upright with his eyes closed. Cale's handsome face was expressionless, but at this moment, his state of mind was far from as calm as it looked. The closer the fighter jet got to its destination in Brazil, the more it burned, the brighter it became. 2 tigers cannot live on one mountain. If the earth were to be compared to that mountain, then the only creatures in the world who could use their physique to become a tiger were Cale and Hulk. Cale had never had such a strong desire to win as at this moment. After he drew the Protoss gene card, he was eager to compete with someone of the same level. Mr. Cale, do you really want to face Hulk alone? General Ross lowered his voice and asked worriedly. It was not that he did not believe in the symbol of peace, but Hulk was too powerful. He was so powerful that he did not dare to inform the elite soldiers in advance that the person they were going to capture was an invincible monster. I'm very sure. Cale nodded and opened his eyes. His golden pupils flashed with a glimmer of brilliance. The strongest on the surface? I'm not convinced. Around 9:00 in the evening. The slums of Rocinha in Brazil were different from the bustling big cities. The lights in the residential areas next to the factories were dim early, and the local residents who were tired from the day's work were basically asleep. At this time, several mysterious vehicles were parked in an alley in the residential area. One of the bulletproof camouflaged vehicles was brightly lit and spacious. It was equipped with all kinds of technological equipment and several split screens. General Ross wore earphones and held a military walkie-talkie. He looked at Cale, who was sitting across from him. It can't be wrong. Bruce Banner is in his house. Cale shrugged and suggested, let your soldiers go over first and see if they can capture him in human form. If they can't capture him, it's best to lure him to the factories. The residential areas here are too densely packed. It's not suitable for battle. General Ross nodded and obeyed, sending out orders into the walkie-talkie. All elite soldiers, bring your numbing firearms and infiltrate the target's house. After receiving the order, the doors of the other vehicles opened immediately. Nearly 10 fully armed elite soldiers lowered their bodies skillfully and walked quickly into the alleys. They were indeed the best of the best. Under the cover of the night, no one could see their figures or traces. Amiibo rushed at the front. The dark night and narrow alleys did not affect his agility. He quickly arrived at his destination's house. Ow ow! The big black dog that was tied up downstairs was startled. As soon as it barked, Amiibo reacted and aimed. The numbing bullet accurately hit the big black dog's neck and silently caused it to crawl on the ground. Amiibo waved his hand forward. His teammates immediately followed behind him and quickly went up the stairs to the third floor. Bang! After installing a small bomb on the door of the target's single room and detonating it, Amiibo rushed into the room with his gun and fired a few shots at the single room's bed. If everything went smoothly, the operation would end here. Amiibo raised his eyebrows and sharply sensed that something was wrong. He went up and lifted the blanket, only to realize that there was a pillow underneath. The target escaped. Amiibo reported in a low voice. Chase. This was General Ross's order from the other end of the walkie-talkie. The elite soldiers immediately followed the tracks downstairs and quickly found a young man with curly hair. He was wearing a red shirt and carrying a backpack. He was running toward the end of the alley. As if he knew the consequences of his anger, the young man with curly hair was running in the direction of the isolated factory. At the same time, in the command vehicle, Kale seemed to be unable to sit still. He suddenly stood up from his seat and reached out to open the car door. General Ross looked at him in shock. "Mr. Kale, what are you?" "It's coming out." Chapter 240. In an alley near the factory. The curly-haired young man, the target of the elite soldiers, Professor Bruce Banner, was running around desperately. Beep beep beep. Due to the heat from the intense exercise, Bruce frowned and his face was filled with fear. The watch on his left wrist that showed his heart rate started to beep. The number on it had already increased from 100 to 200. Don't come out, bear with it a little longer," Bruce muttered as he panted heavily. His right hand pressed hard on his chest. His heart was beating strongly like a monster roaring angrily. As he muttered to himself, the monster seemed to be trying to persuade him to stop. However, at this moment, two soldiers suddenly rushed out from the alley in front of him and blocked his way. "Stop! Don't move!" Bruce's expression changed. He turned around and was about to walk back, but the sound of footsteps and figures followed one after another. The path behind him was blocked by even more soldiers in the blink of an eye. "Raise your hands. Squat down. You have nowhere to run." Amib walked out from the group behind him. He aimed his gun at Bruce and said coldly, "Don't force me. If this continues, it's going to come out." Bruce raised his hands helplessly and said with a face full of fear. Faced with a situation where he had nowhere to run, his heart rate watch started to beep again. The number on it had quietly jumped past 200. "What's coming out?" Amib frowned. He didn't think too much about it. In order to prevent any accidents, he still pulled the trigger subconsciously. The bullet from the paralysis gun accurately hit Bruce's neck. Bruce's eyelids rolled, and he fainted due to the paralysis. He fell forward on the floor of the dim alley. Only the heart rate watch was still beeping. No one noticed that the number on it was close to 300. "The target has been knocked out. Retrieving now." Amib reported into the walkie-talkie and waved his hands forward. The two teammates behind him immediately put away their guns and rushed forward with handcuffs and other tools. "Gotcha." The two soldiers worked together and locked the unconscious Bruce's wrists behind his back. At this moment, almost all the soldiers felt that they had completed their mission. Just as they secretly heaved a sigh of relief, a terrifying change suddenly occurred, as a dull thud rang out, accompanied by a pained cry that tore through the night sky. Two soldiers suddenly flew out from the darkness of the alley. They flew more than 10 meters in the air before they crashed heavily into the pillar behind Amib. Cold sweat trickled down Amib's forehead. He turned around and saw the corpses of his comrades, who had been on a mission with him, stacked together like two meat patties. Clearly, they were deader than dead. He looked into the alley again. In the darkness, where Bruce had fainted, there was a giant monster standing on 2 legs. "Open fire!" Amib shouted calmly. He aimed at the huge figure and pulled the trigger. The rest of his teammates followed suit. In an instant, the densely packed paralysis bullets intertwined and landed on the surface of the monsters in the alley, but without exception, all of them bounced back and scattered on the ground like rubber bullets. Roar! The monster let out a thunderous roar, and its huge feet stomped on the ground. The paralysis bullets on the ground were crushed into powder, and its true appearance was finally revealed under the illumination of the street lamps. My God! Amib sucked in a cold breath. There was no doubt that the monster in front of him was a monster. It was a giant with a pair of dark green eyes. It was so tall that it was a little bloated. It wore a pair of large black pants, and its rough skin was an ugly green. Its entire body was filled with bulging muscles and veins. No one would doubt the terrifying power it contained. It was grinning and letting out a furious roar, as if it was born for battle. Its aura was thick and violent, far surpassing that of any other creature. General Roth. There's a green monster. What exactly is that? Amib forced himself to ask calmly. That's our target tonight, Hulk. General Roth sighed in response from the battle earpiece. When he knew that Hulk had appeared, he knew that the elite soldiers had already lost the battle. Hulk, Amib did not have time to think too much. Hulk had already charged forward, and the ground trembled with every step he took. The threat of death far exceeded that of a rhino charge. Retreat! Amib shouted and turned around to escape. His teammate beside him reacted a beat too late, and Hulk caught him with his bare hands. Amib had seen all kinds of battles, but this was the first time he had encountered a monster like this. He had just rushed 10 meters away when he heard the sound of wind whistling behind him. He turned around and saw that Hulk had thrown his teammate's body like a weapon in his anger. Amib did not have time to dodge and could only raise his hand to block. As a result, the force was transmitted to his shoulder, and there was no room for him to dissipate the force. In an instant, even his own body was sent flying. Amib rolled on the ground a few times and broke many of his ribs. In the end, he crashed into the wall in a bloody mess. This was Hulk. His casual strength was measured in tons. Normal people were as weak as ants in front of him, unable to withstand a single blow. Roar! Hulk roared angrily and took a few steps forward, approaching Amib who was twitching on the ground. It's not bad to die in the hands of such a powerful creature. Amib forced a smile and closed his eyes in resignation. However, after a few seconds, he still did not die. He opened his eyes in surprise. Hulk stopped beside him. The shadow of his huge body covered him, but his eyes did not even look at him. He only raised his head to the night sky, and a different emotion appeared on his monstrous face. Curiosity, realization, wildness, brutality, coldness, and a high fighting spirit. In the night sky, Kale floated low in the air. His silver hair was messed up by the night wind. His golden eyes were burning like flames, and his dark wings flapped lightly, forming small hurricanes and white waves. Kale looked at Hulk, and Hulk looked at Kale. The two of them stared at each other like this, unable to tolerate any other weak creatures. The auras of the two of them were pulling each other. So, it's you. Hulk said in a low and hoarse voice. If Bruce Banner still had consciousness, even he would be astonished. That transformed state that only knew how to rage and wreak havoc could actually speak human language one day. Come here. Kale smiled faintly. He flapped his wings lightly and turned into a black shadow, flying rapidly to the factory beside him. Hulk grinned, squatted down slightly, and jumped with all his might. He exploded with an amazing jumping ability, jumping dozens of meters high without any assistance. He crossed the alley and fell straight to the empty space in the factory that Kale had arrived at. When he landed on the empty space, the cement ground could not withstand the impact and cracked open. Hulk looked at Kale, who was 10 meters away, and roared angrily again, as if the lucidity of speaking human language just now was just an illusion. "Come on." Kale took a deep breath and clenched his hands. Venom excitedly covered his body with a biological coat and turned into a dark monster that did not lose to Hulk in appearance. There was no technology or magic in this battle. There was only the physique of a mutated creature that had reached the limit. This was the top confrontation in the history of Earth: strength against strength, speed against speed, and physique against physique. Chapter 241. Under the darkness of the night, in the open space beside the factory, Kale, who was completely covered in venom, had long and narrow eyes that were scarlet. Every muscle on his tall body was bulging, and there were lightning-like and flame-like patterns on the surface of his body. He looked like a dark monster from hell. Hulk, who had transformed into Bruce, had beast-like green eyes. His dense muscle fibers were even rougher and sturdier. The veins on his body were bulging with strength and anger. He looked like a green giant from billions of prehistoric times. Both of them no longer looked like humans. Whether it was their appearance, personality, or aura, they were completely inclined towards inhuman wildness. Their existence itself was detached from the aesthetics of nature. Their bodies contained terrifying power, as if they were born purely for battle. Very good prey. Venom laughed wildly in Kale's mind. Driven by his high spirits, Kale grinned happily and no longer suppressed his desire to fight. He clenched his dark fists and raised his left fist provocatively at Hulk. Roar! Hulk roared angrily and stomped his left foot on the ground. The cement floor instantly crumbled like a spider web. Hulk's slightly bloated body was as fast as a giant cannonball with its amazing jumping ability. With dust rising from his tail, the Hulk was already in front of Kyle in the blink of an eye. Without any fancy fighting skills, the Hulk simply arched his right hand backward, put his strong and huge shoulders in front of him, and charged forward with the brute force of his entire body. Hulk's shoulder collision. There were no energy fluctuations, but the air waves still exploded exaggeratedly in all directions under the high-speed movement of his physique. Even a high-speed rail plane would be destroyed on the spot if it was hit head-on by this attack. Even if it was a skyscraper, it would collapse on the spot. Kale's eyes widened. He originally wanted to block with his fist, but his combat experience prompted him to change from offense to defense at the last minute. He quickly crossed his hands in front of his body and acted as a physical shield. His left foot was pushed back on the cement floor. Then, the two of them collided with a muffled sound at zero distance. Kale's long and narrow pupils suddenly contracted. He felt that what landed on his arms was not a shoulder attack from a living creature, but a meteorite falling from the sky. To be honest, he regretted it the moment he came face to face with Hulk. Hulk stopped at the spot where Kale was standing and raised his right shoulder. The debris and dust were lifted a few meters away. Kale, who was in the center of the impact, was directly sent flying. Bang! 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 Kyle's dark body tumbled in the air. First, he smashed through the steel gate of the factory behind him. He couldn't stop himself from smashing through the machinery inside the factory. Finally, he flew out of the brick wall on the other side of the factory. The entire huge beverage production factory seemed to have been split open from the middle by a giant armor-piercing bullet. The path along the way was turned into ruins, causing many circuits and equipment to go out of order and ignite partial flames. I was careless. Kyle shook his head helplessly. He swung his hands, which were quickly healing from the broken bones, and stood up from the shallow pit in a slightly sorry state. However, he was sent flying 50 meters away in a single exchange. Not dodging the attack had always been his habitual thinking. After drawing the Protoss gene card, Kale's physique was equivalent to the combination of a super soldier and a Protoss. His physique alone was stronger and stronger than the average Protoss. He could perfectly exert 10 tons of strength with a wave of his hand. Coupled with the full coverage buff of the mature venom, his strength had reached nearly 15 tons. His physical defense was also relatively strong and invincible. But Hulk's pure physical strength was hundreds of tons. That's right, hundreds of tons of strength. Kale naturally checked Hulk's cards when he got close. Hulk Gene, Hulk's genes. Rare purple ability card. Due to a large amount of gamma radiation, the body has undergone an extreme mutation. Every time his heart rate increases due to emotional agitation, he will become a raging Hulk. Hulk has superhuman strength, energy, endurance, and super regenerative ability. The angrier he is, the stronger he becomes. He has the potential of hundreds of tons of strength. His skin is resistant to physical, cold weapons, bullets, and bomb explosions. He is immune to diseases and poisons, and is immune to extremely high temperatures. His leg muscles are unusually developed. He can jump, cross long distances, run quickly, and even create shock waves by clapping his palms. Secreted glands can strengthen his lungs. He can breathe and move quickly underwater at various depths. Warning: his body and consciousness are usually controlled by Hulk after transformation. Current status: unable to draw. Rare purple ability card prefix is already available. Hulk really has the perfect gene in terms of combat power. Kale sighed. Even he was envious of Hulk's superhuman physique. Although the Protoss gene was equally powerful, he was completely defeated by Hulk in terms of physical strength. Of course, the lifespan and divine potential of the Protoss were not something that Hulk could compare to. More importantly, Hulk's genes would split into a Hulk personality in the original body and gradually dominate the original body's consciousness. In other words, Hulk's genes had reached a certain evolutionary extreme. They were so powerful that they were on the verge of self-destruction and destruction. Because they had always retained their human personality, they were able to reach their current state of equilibrium. Before Kale could think too much, the ground trembled again. He quickly looked up and saw Hulk in the night sky in front of him. It was falling toward him. I can't take it head on. As soon as Kale thought this, he reacted quickly and rolled on the ground. Just as he finished dodging, Hulk landed in the original pit. The ground trembled and countless pieces of gravel and dust flew everywhere. Whip. Claws. While he was rolling on the ground, Kale glanced at Hulk from the corner of his eye. He swung his left hand and a long black whip quickly shot out. The long whip wrapped around Hulk's thick neck and pulled his body behind Hulk's back. At the same time, Kale clenched his right fist tightly. 3 dark claws stretched out from the tip of his fist. They tore through the dust and air and pierced straight toward the back of Hulk's neck. Roar! Hulk roared. He touched his back with his big hand and stained it with dark green blood. He turned around angrily and was about to grab Kale. Stepping on the back of Hulk's head to avoid the big green hand, Kale took advantage of the momentum and jumped. He turned into a dark shadow and shot toward the factory. The quick and fierce attack of the dark claws only pierced through Hulk's basic skin. How could he fight it head-on? Kyle gritted his teeth. Once again, he was faced with the same problem as when he fought against Kratos, the god of war, in the duel arena on planet Sokka. In the state of being completely covered by venom, in the face of an abnormal enemy with thick skin and flesh, it was not enough to rely on the long whip, sharp claws, and blade mode. What's more, his opponent now was Hulk. Even with thousands of tentacles, Kale was not confident that he could seriously injure it. Let me think about how to fight. Chapter 242. Inside the enclosed production factory. It was late at night and the workers had all gone home to sleep. Thanks to this, they were able to escape from tonight's battle. The huge assembly line production factory was divided into 3 floors by metal frames. Some of the equipment had been smashed by Kale and were emitting sparks and black smoke. Thud thud thud. The ground of the factory trembled slightly as a dark green giant barged in. Its oily green eyes scanned the surroundings as if it was looking for someone in every corner. Whoosh! A faint black shadow swept past from the left. Hulk grabbed the metal frame and broke it into pieces before throwing it over. The metal frame brushed past the black shadow and smashed into the glass frame behind it. The sound of glass shattering could be heard. The black shadow disappeared again and silently blended into the shadows of the night. Roar! Hulk growled impatiently. Seeing an air tank in front of him, he walked forward and grabbed the bottom of the tank with both hands. It was a huge cylinder with a length of 7 meters and a radius of 2 meters. He used it as a tool to pull out more than 10 tons of material. Hulk pushed with both hands and the huge air tank flew out. It rolled on the ground and swept away the countless equipment bunkers in the small half of the factory. Whoosh! A black shadow seemed to be forced out of the tank and flashed in the shadows. Hulk's senses were very sharp. He growled and immediately sprinted into the shadows. As his body approached, black whips twisted and intertwined in the shadows. They reflected the dim light and faintly formed a half-formed net with the help of the iron pillars in the factory. After the Hulk walked into the trap, a scarlet light flashed across the ceiling of the 3rd floor above his head. Reel in the net. Kyle was originally standing upside down on the ceiling. At this moment, he abruptly jumped down from the ground. The long whips in his hands violently pulled downwards, causing the net that had been woven with the whips to shrink. The green giant roared angrily. The tough dark whip wrapped around his hands, waist, and neck, and tightened around his neck with all its might. Kale did not attempt to subdue Hulk with his whip. As long as he could temporarily restrict his movements, he would be able to bring the battle back under his control. Have a taste of this. He licked his lips with his scarlet tongue, and a strong blast of air burst out from under his feet. He pulled the long whip with both hands, and at the same time, sprinted forward in the air. Following the momentum of his body, he kicked Hulk's face with his knee. This knee strike perfectly fused the strength of the 3 parts of the body, bringing out the strength of the body to the extreme. Kale's expression changed slightly. Hulk's body did not move at all, and his head only tilted to the left. Green blood flowed out of his nose, and his head was a little dizzy from the huge impact. But that was all. They were all superficial wounds. This was not enough to win the battle against Hulk. Instead, it made him even angrier and more violent. Hulk stared at Kale, who was close to him. His green eyes were burning with anger. Under the strength of his strong hands, the tough whip began to break. Kale was not afraid at all. He took the opportunity to quickly retract his knee. His left hand was still bound by the long whip, and his raised right hand had turned into a sharp blade. He slashed towards Hulk's forehead quickly and forcefully. The blade flashed, and the blade touched between Hulk's eyebrows, creating a deep wound. Disgusting green blood flowed out. Roar! Hulk roared angrily. All the long whips that were binding him were completely broken. He raised his hands, and with a punch, he sent Kale flying. Bang! Accompanied by a dull sound, Kale's back arched and collided with the gas tank. The steel shell of the giant gas tank caved in and was almost broken into 2. Master, it seems that we can't beat it, Venom's bitter laughter sounded in his mind. His voice was no longer as confident as before. Cut the crap. Hurry up and think of a way. Kale took a deep breath. He lay in the gas tank with his arms and legs spread out. 2 of his ribs were slightly broken in his chest. Fortunately, they healed quickly with the help of the self-healing factor. However, while he healed himself, Hulk's wounds were also gradually healing. Venom had almost used up all his moves. If he could no longer use them, he could only rely on his divine body to operate the fire god's power to fight. By some time. I still have one more move. Venom quickly replied. No one noticed that on the ground beside Hulk, the small puddle of black liquid formed by the broken whip suddenly moved. The black liquid slid up Hulk's feet and disappeared into his neck at the last second before the wound on his neck healed. "That's what you said." Kale pressed his hands against the shell of the gas tank and pushed away the twisted steel. However, before he could stand up, a huge shadow shrouded his body. Raising his head slightly, Kale's eyes met with Hulk's in front of him. Hulk was grinning and growling angrily at him, stretching out a big bare foot. Bam! Kale's body was like a black rubber ball, flying diagonally upwards at high speed. He knocked over the iron frames of the second and third floors and broke through the ceiling of the factory building. While he was in the air, a pair of wings spread out from his back. Kale stopped in mid-air as if he had braked. The venom on his body sprinkled down like rain. "Venom, how long do you want to buy time? I'm really going to lose my temper," Kale said in a low voice. His divine body had not awakened and could not use divine power. In the hands of an extremely angry Hulk, he was still too passive. Still, before Venom could finish his words, Kale's pupils shrank. The roof of the factory building below suddenly broke through. Hulk rushed straight towards him like a rocket. Kale was just about to flap his wings to dodge, but Hulk was too fast. Before he could react, Hulk's left hand had already grabbed one of his feet. "It's over." Such a thought popped up in Kale's mind. With his ankle held by Hulk, he couldn't break free for a moment. He could only free fall with Hulk pulling him down to the factory below. The wind whistled past him. In his field of vision, the distance between his body and the factory below was shrinking. Under the pressure of danger, golden flames appeared in Kale's eyes, causing the venom mask on his face to melt and fade away like frost. Just as Kale couldn't help but withdraw venom and release his divine power, Venom's excited voice suddenly rang in his mind, "It's done." As if following its words, drops of sticky black liquid emerged from Hulk's body and returned to Venom's body on the surface of Kale's body, making up for the part of Venom that had melted away. Kale was stunned. The 5 fingers of his left hand slowly clenched into a fist. The black shell of his entire arm began to expand rapidly and soon formed a giant fist that resembled a hammer. The power of his whole body was mobilized and controlled, increasing and condensing on the hammer in his left fist. The moment Kale was about to hit the ground, he subconsciously threw a punch and bombarded Hulk's sturdy chest nearby. The power that he had stored up was like a flood that broke through a dam, gushing out without restraint. The next moment. Chapter 243. Puff. The dark wings flapped violently and immediately formed 2 small hurricanes. The strong wind blew the glass bottles in the factory. The tall body that was falling stopped abruptly from touching the ground. It stopped dangerously at a low altitude of half a meter above the factory. Flapping his wings, Kale remained suspended in the air. He looked at Hulk, who was blasted 30 meters away with half of its body still in the pit. His eyes subconsciously turned to his deformed left hand. His fist could no longer be called a fist. It was more like a huge hammer armor. Layers of dark keratin membrane were wrapped around and polished. It was like a bony form that was out of the scope of the outer layer. Kale didn't ask Venom because the moment Venom's new form appeared, he knew what Venom had just done. Just now. Venom used the part of its body that left the main body to control and lurk into Hulk's body. It learned Hulk's talent ability during the battle and fed it back to the main body. This ability was now the new armed form. It could be called Heavy Fist or Heavy Hammer. Kale could clearly feel that the functional strength of his body was automatically gathered at the tip of the left fist at all times. It was stored and stacked. There is no need for any skills. Relying on the superhuman physique to throw a heavy punch, this is Hulk's best fighting style. It is also the perfect armed form to control the body's strength. After Kale realized this, he looked at Hulk with his scarlet eyes. His slender tongue licked his lower lips. His desire to fight burned like a flame again. Roar. With a low roar like an ancient beast, the Hulk fish rolled and stood up. The bricks and equipment on its body flew away. The green-skinned monster's body was burning with anger that made people's hearts tremble. Bang! It stomped on the ground and leaped out. Its huge body dashed forward, following the path it plowed with its own body and started sprinting. Just in time. Kale took a deep breath. Instead of retreating, he moved forward. His wings flapped backward like a rocket and swept towards the approaching Hulk. It was as if Mars had collided with Earth, a battle formation where neither side was willing to give an inch. One green and one black figure were about to collide head-on. Hulk roared angrily and charged forward like a pile driver. His monster-level body structure cooperated with his strength and punched out with his right fist. Kale's eyes flickered. He did not dodge or block. Instead, he raised the hammer in his left hand, which had been charging for a long time, and smashed it fiercely at the big guy in front of him. The moment the green fist collided with the black hammer, the entire space in the factory seemed to have come to a standstill. All sounds disappeared and the place fell into a dead silence. Then, with the two of them as the center. Buzz, the turbulent white airwaves surged wildly, and the air pressure in the area exploded inch by inch. The gravel that flew into the air was shattered into fine powder, and the sound waves swept out in all directions like tidal waves. It was clearly just a clash of pure physical strength, but it was as shocking as the detonation of two thermonuclear weapons. Using the hammer in his left hand to block Hulk's fist, Kale gritted his teeth and flapped his wings frantically. His body was pushed back about half a meter before he could stabilize himself. No matter how angry Hulk shouted, gritted his teeth, and exerted strength in his right hand like a balloon, he was still unable to completely push Kale back. In other words, Kale's hammer battle form was still slightly weaker than Hulk's strength. However, he still managed to block Hulk's full-force punch head-on. A punch with close to 100 tons of force. "Did you enjoy the kick just now?" Kale whispered coldly. Looking into Hulk's eyes that were filled with anger, he slowly extended his other hand while still blocking his fist. Under Hulk's puzzled gaze, the black shell on his right hand rapidly condensed and expanded. Soon, it transformed into the shape of a hammer that was exactly the same as his left hand. It exuded a heavy and threatening aura. "Now it's my turn." As soon as Kale finished speaking, the hammer in his right hand was raised high. With a slightly slanted angle, it smashed down violently on Hulk's head. Clang! It was like an iron pillar hitting a metal bell. Even though Hulk's head was 100 times harder than steel, under the heavy hammer that was infused with strength, his eyes rolled back and he was temporarily stunned. His huge green body could not stop itself from flying backward. His body kept rolling along the ground from one end of the factory to the other. Just like Kale, he cut the entire factory into two halves from the middle. In the shocking battle between two monster-level fighters, the factory that was already riddled with holes finally could not withstand the shaking of the earthquake. The structure of the factory started to crumble and collapse, at this moment, in the alley beside the factory. General Ross rushed over with his soldiers and took care of the bodies of the two soldiers who had died tragically. He also ordered the medical staff to give first aid to the severely injured and dying Amiro. At this moment, General Ross and the other soldiers looked up. Their pupils constricted in unison as they saw the huge factory collapse rapidly under the night sky. Within a few seconds, it had become a wasteland. "What's the situation at the factory now?" General Ross asked calmly into the walkie-talkie. He had already sent elite soldiers to conduct long-distance tracking and investigation on Hulk. Reporting, General. A soldier lying on the roof of a building on the outskirts of the factory with a night vision telescope was shocked. He hesitantly reported to the walkie-talkie, "The target, the Hulk, is being suppressed by that dark creature." "Hulk is being suppressed?" General Ross's jaw dropped. He had heard about the events of World War II from his father since he was young. At this time, Kale had disappeared. Therefore, the identity of the dark creature that was fighting with Hulk in the factory was self-evident. General Ross did not expect Kale to be so powerful that he could suppress Hulk, whom even the army could not do anything about. In the battle in the wasteland of the factory, just as the scout had said, Kale had the absolute upper hand now. No, it should be said that he was beating Hulk up. Roar! Accompanied by a strong and unresigned monster roar, Hulk was once again sent flying with a bang. His body formed a perfect parabola in the air. Whoosh! A black figure swept across the night sky slightly sluggishly. With a speed that was half as fast as before, it chased after Hulk, who was still flying in the air. Hulk angrily opened his arms and tried to catch the black figure. However, with a slight flap of his wings, Kale agilely dodged and flew above Hulk's head. With the slightly clumsy hammer form, Kale's agility was greatly reduced. However, with the help of his wings, his speed was still a notch higher than Hulk's. Kale grinned and swung the dark hammers in his hands. He swung them left and right at the Hulk, who had nowhere to borrow strength from, and smashed him down bit by bit. Hulk, who was full of anger, could not use his strength. The heavy hammers were like missiles that bombarded the green skin's muscles. Chapter 244. Kale's dark wings fluttered slightly as he spun in the air and smashed his twin hammers onto Hulk's body. Twin hammers. Hulk had no chance to retaliate. He fell stiffly from a height of more than 10 meters and crashed headfirst into the ruins of the factory. Poof! It was as if a small meteorite had landed on the ground. Under the strong impact, gravel and dust flew everywhere and a 3-meter-wide crater was formed. Kale panted heavily and flew to the edge of the crater. He raised the hammer in his left hand and walked forward. He wanted to strike while the iron was hot and continue his attack. Roar! The durability of the Hulk's skin and flesh was obviously not inferior to the strength of Superman. After being hit by so many hammers, he stood up without losing the ability to fight and leaped out of the pit. Continue. Kale licked his lips. He held the hammer in front of him and tensed his body. He was ready to fight with all his might. However, after Hulk rushed out of the crater, he roared at him unwillingly and turned around without hesitation. He leaped dozens of meters away and disappeared into the darkness of the wilderness in the opposite direction. When it came out, it looked like it was running away. Even Kyle was a little dumbfounded at the sight of it. Hulk ran away? It shouldn't be. Even if Hulk was facing an enemy who was 10 times or 100 times stronger than him, he would be so angry that he would fight whenever he saw him. He didn't know what fear and running away were. That's right. Hulk's personality isn't strong enough now. It should be that Bruce's human personality is reversing, he's going to turn back into a human. Kyle's mind worked extremely fast. He quickly thought of this and knew that this was the best time to capture the Hulk. He was about to chase after the Hulk, who was gradually getting farther away, but as soon as he opened his wings behind him, his movements suddenly stopped. This is... Kale's pupils constricted. The heavy hammers in his hands began to fade. He couldn't maintain the state of being completely covered by venom. The black liquid began to melt down like water. Drip, drip. Sorry, Master, Venom said weakly. The symbiotic body changed into casual wear mode, which consumed the least energy. Master. Vice's deformed metal necklace shimmered as she explained, you were in a symbiotic state with Venom just now. After maintaining the two-handed hammer combat form, your stamina has been severely consumed. Now you are almost exhausted to the limit. I know. Kale gasped for breath. His face was a little pale, and sweat dripped down his body like rain. After leaving the state of full coverage, Kale felt as if he had gone from being at the peak of his strength to a state of exhaustion. The intense battle and the soaring adrenaline had affected his judgment of his own body. Only when he completely stopped moving and relaxed his tense body did he realize how bad his body was. Tired. Both his mind and body were exhausted. Every punch in the heavy hammer state required him to transfer all the strength in his body to the maximum, so there wasn't a single muscle in his body that wasn't sore and tired. Hungry. His stomach was rumbling with hunger. Instinctively, his god body needed food to support itself. The self-healing factor and the cells in his body seemed to be screaming and crying for enough nutrition. Trapped. His eyelids were as heavy as lead. His consciousness was so dispirited that he wanted to sleep. He couldn't wait to lie down on the ground and have a good sleep. Just like before, the side effect of using thousands of tentacles, but this time the situation was even more serious. Because it was his first time using the heavy hammer and his hands were deformed, it was caused by continuous high-load combat. I actually got a little carried away. Kale sighed. He could only raise his head slightly and watch Hulk disappear into the night in the distance. At the military vehicle of the Field Command Center, General Ross was back in the car, receiving information from the scouts everywhere. But 5 minutes ago, the battle in the factory ruins had quieted down, and there wasn't much information sent back. Just as he put down his headphones, a soldier's voice suddenly came from outside the car. "General, Mr. Kale is back." "What?" General Ross was shocked. He quickly opened the car door and went out to greet him. Sure enough, he saw Kale surrounded by a few armed soldiers, walking over with a sleepy face. "Mr. Kale, are you okay?" General Ross didn't ask about Hulk's situation right away. He asked with concern. "I'm fine." Hulk ran towards the wilderness. He should have turned back into his human form by now. "You can send soldiers to track him down." Kale replied weakly. General Ross didn't think too much about it. He immediately ordered the surrounding soldiers to follow him. After the armed soldiers left, Kale entered the car and leaned against the seat tiredly. General Ross looked at him worriedly. "Mr. Kale, you seem to be very weak. Do you need a doctor to check on you?" "No." Kale shook his head and said softly, "I just need food now." "Food?" General Ross was stunned. He immediately ordered the soldiers to bring over the canned food and compressed biscuits. Looking at the large and small cans in front of him, Kale wasn't picky. He picked up a can and opened it with his fingernails. He stuffed a large piece of meat into his mouth with a spoon and wolfed it down. A few minutes later, General Ross lowered his head and looked at the empty cans on the ground beside the car. He swallowed his saliva and said calmly into the walkie-talkie, "Give me more food. Enough for 10 people." Kyle put down his spoon and finally stopped eating after he had finished eating enough for 30 people. However, his stomach didn't seem to be bloated at all. "Mr. Kale, do you still want to eat?" General Ross went forward and asked carefully. "No need. I'm a little full." Kale breathed a sigh of relief. The hunger in his stomach had been eliminated. General Ross's face was bitter. "A little full? You've eaten 1/3 of the food supply for this mission by yourself. I'm going to sleep. Don't disturb me if there's nothing." As soon as Kale finished speaking, he closed his eyes without waiting for General Ross to respond. Half a second later, he fell into a deep sleep, the back of his head leaning against the seat and snoring loudly. General Ross blinked and sighed. The symbol of peace. What a godly man. The night passed. After dawn, the old factory site was reduced to ruins. There were many shocking traces of battle on it. The residents there were shocked. There were also rumors of the battle between gods and demons last night. The armed soldiers searched for half the night. General Ross finally received an important piece of information. Bruce Banner came to the port off the coast of Brazil and completely disappeared. It was very likely that he had left Brazil on a ship. Where would Bruce go after leaving Brazil? Chapter 245. America, Second Military Base. the large transport fighter slowly landed at the airport. The military ambulance that had received the notice was already waiting by the side. After the cabin's deck opened, the medical staff quickly swarmed in and carried the unconscious Amadou away on a medical stretcher. General Ross came to the edge of the deck and greeted the officer from the base who had come to pick him up. He turned around and urged the armed soldiers in the cabin, "Is it still not enough?" As soon as he finished speaking, there was the dull sound of bones cracking. An armed soldier flew out a few meters in a parabolic trajectory from the cabin's hull and landed heavily on the steel floor. "General, we really can't do it," the armed soldier replied as he coughed up blood. He was helped up by the base's medical staff and taken away on a medical stretcher in a sorry state. Kale was still asleep in the military vehicle. The armed soldier wanted to move him out of the vehicle, but as soon as he opened the door, Kale's subconscious instinctively made him raise his hand and make a simple gesture of shooing away flies. The current Kale's strength was only weaker than Hulk's. A casual slap from him contained at least a ton of force. How could a normal person's body withstand it? Therefore, the armed soldiers who had accompanied him on this mission did not fall in Hulk's hands. Instead, they fell in the hands of the sleeping Kale in the end. General Ross looked at the military vehicle parked in the cabin's hall and did not know what to do for a moment. This was a symbol of peace. He could not leave it on the fighter jet or military vehicle, right? Just as General Ross was fretting, a beautiful black figure in high heels approached the fighter jet from outside the airport. Most of the soldiers who passed by were dazed and had no intention of stopping her. Some soldiers wanted to go up and stop her, but they were quickly stopped by the air wall. General Ross was surprised. He looked at the Eastern beauty in a business suit and was stunned. At the same time, he sensed a faint sense of danger from her. He could not help but ask seriously, "You are Family Cal, from the unnatural law firm?" Yutong smiled and handed over a black and gold card that looked like a card. Her slender, white finger pointed at the military vehicle Kale was in. "I'm here to pick up our master. California, outside the visa checkpoint." After a series of thrilling disguises, Bruce Banner, with a tattered shirt and a pair of loose pants on his lower body and a cap on his messy hair, finally stood on the land of his hometown that he had not seen for a long time. The military's arrest warrant had been issued for 4 years. If it wasn't for the military surprise attack, which forced him to take the wrong path back, he probably wouldn't have returned to this country for the rest of his life. Bruce lowered the brim of his hat, hiding his weathered face in the shadow. He carefully avoided the noisy crowd and walked on the street like a homeless man. He walked around aimlessly for a while before he raised his head in surprise. Only then did he realize that he had subconsciously arrived at the main entrance of a university. Culver University. This was the place where Bruce's fate changed. 4 years ago, he had fallen from the pinnacle of his career and love life to the bottomless abyss of being a monster criminal who escaped from an accident. At the entrance of the university, birds were singing and flowers were fragrant. The fountain was shining with golden light under the sun. Young boys and girls were playing on the lawn, and the aisles were full of students and teachers in formal clothes. Bruce was afraid that he would be recognized by someone he knew, so he hid in the shade of the trees in the aisles. As if God was playing a trick on him, a female teacher with long hair and a voluptuous figure happened to walk out of the self-study door. Her hands were intimately holding onto a man in a suit as they walked past the aisles while talking and laughing. It was his former girlfriend, Eliza Taylor, the daughter of General Ross. Bruce sighed in his heart. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, a gust of wind blew and a promotional poster fell into his hand. Unnatural firm, 6 words that he had never heard of before came into view. Bruce frowned slightly and his gaze moved down to read. Did you wake up with an extraordinary physical strength? Did you get bitten by an animal and obtain the corresponding animal's racial talent? Did your body begin to mutate due to an accident caused by radiation and thus awaken a superpower that even you can't control? Supernatural firm specializes in dealing with unnatural events. We are willing to help you solve your problems. For more details, please call the hotline 0001. What company is this? After reading the introduction, Bruce's eyes widened in shock. This company was simply built for people like him. However, 4 years ago, he had never even heard of the company's name, let alone its existence. It must be a lie, Bruce muttered and flipped to the back. His eyes widened in shock again. Behind the promotional poster of the firm, there were many authoritative certifications. The United Nations Association, the United States Military, the CIA, the United States Strategic Bureau. This is a private company? What's its background? Bruce choked and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He was in a daze. What happened when he was not in the United States? New York, 2nd Military Base, Medical Emergency Room. When the military doctor heard footsteps approaching, he turned around and saw General Ross. He quickly stood up and saluted. General Ross. How's Emmett? General Ross's expression was solemn. Through the glass window of the emergency room, he looked at the naked man who was lying on a large instrument with 4 tubes inserted all over his body. He's still in a severe coma. There are many comminuted fractures all over his body. Even if he wakes up, he'll have to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair if he doesn't become a vegetable. The military doctor did not hide anything and shook his head regretfully. Hearing this, General Ross was silent for a moment. He made a decision and said, "Let him try that medicine." That medicine? The military doctor was stunned but quickly understood. He said hesitantly in disbelief, "But if it fails, Emmett will probably never wake up again." "Let's try." General Ross said in a low voice, "For someone with such a strong desire to win and pride, if he wakes up and finds out that he's permanently disabled, he'll probably want to commit suicide. It's better to give him a chance now." "Okay, I understand. I'll go prepare now." The military doctor nodded and hurried to the medicine storage room. "It's all up to you now. I'll give you a chance to get close to that man." General Ross looked at the unconscious Emmett and muttered to himself. Many years ago, he had single-handedly initiated and restarted the Super Soldier project from World War II. Now, the Super Soldier Serum had been completed, but the strong repulsive properties were still unable to be spread among the soldiers. It was still in the clinical trial stage. If Emmett could transform from his desperate situation and become a new generation of super soldier, he might be a hero born in the military and slightly touch the realm of strength that symbolized peace. Chapter 246. A day later. California, Culver University, Laboratory Building. Bruce, dressed in casual clothes, sat in front of the computer in the laboratory and communicated with a scientist who studied gamma radiation through a chat software. He glanced at the female teacher beside him from time to time with an indescribable bitterness at the corner of his mouth. Bruce hesitated again and again yesterday. In the end, he did not contact the unnatural firm because of his inner guard. He wanted to rely on himself to solve the symptoms of Hulk's transformation. In the end, perhaps God had mercy on him and let him reunite with his girlfriend last night. "Banna, is your friend reliable?" Elisa put her hand on Bruce's shoulder and asked nervously. When she saw Bruce last night, she was so happy that she almost went crazy. Now, she did not want to leave his side for even a moment. She was even more afraid of losing him again. "Reliable. I've been secretly contacting him in Brazil. He specializes in gamma radiation. Only he understands the current situation of my body." Bruce took a deep breath and said excitedly, "I sent him some body serum last time. He sent me a message saying that he has a little chance of eliminating the gamma radiation in my body." "I hope it works," Elisa said expectantly. Boom. 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 Suddenly, there was a chaotic noise outside the window of the building. Elisa hurriedly stood up and looked out the window. On the green lawn that was as soft as a carpet, armored vehicles loaded with armed soldiers drove in from all directions and surrounded the outside of the laboratory building. At the back of the army, her father, General Ross, was the leader. Banna. Elisa looked back worriedly. Bruce sensed something and stood up from his seat. He shrugged and said, "Elisa, leave this place immediately." But Elisa wanted to say something, but Bruce interrupted her and said with a bitter smile, "Don't worry, it's hard for me to die even if I want to." Half a minute later, when he saw Elisa running out of the building, General Ross did not hesitate anymore. He coldly ordered the soldiers, "Smoke bomb, force it out." Roger. 2 soldiers immediately carried their guns and fired smoke bombs at the building. Within a few seconds, the inside of the laboratory building was covered in thick smoke. Under everyone's nervous gaze, a huge shadow suddenly appeared in the white smoke inside the floor-to-ceiling glass of the laboratory building. Roar! As the monster growled, the floor-to-ceiling window exploded from the inside out. Hulk, who was only wearing a pair of large underpants, roared angrily and jumped down from the 3rd floor to the lawn outside. "All soldiers, attack!" General Ross waved his hand. Meanwhile, New York, Dehow Tower, top floor office cum lounge. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, Cale raised his eyebrows slightly, and his brain gradually woke up from its daze. Before he even opened his eyes, he felt that he was lying on a soft bed. However, the pillow was not only soft, but also had a suitable warmth and fragrance. "Boss, you're awake?" Cale's eyes widened as the woman called out to him softly. What entered his vision was a pair of breasts wrapped in a shirt and a beautiful face. Oh, so it was Yutong's lap pillow. Cale yawned slightly and got up from the bed. His bare feet stepped on the cold floor. He looked at the luxurious bedroom he was in and the city scenery outside the floor-to-ceiling window. He had a rough idea of what had happened next. Cale stretched his body and looked at the bright sunlight shining in through the window. He asked curiously, "How long have I slept?" "Should be about a day and a half." Yutong transformed into a secretary and got down from the bed. She tidied up the quilt and pillows on the bed and smoothed out her wrinkled stockings and suit. "What's the situation with Ross?" Cale asked as he looked for slippers. Yutong tapped lightly with her finger, and a cupboard opened automatically. A pair of slippers flew out and landed on the ground in front of him. On the bedside table, Vice, who had transformed into a phone, replied, "They just sent a message half an hour ago saying that they've found Bruce's whereabouts. He's in Culver University. They should send the army to encircle him now. Then there's no hurry." Cale put on the slippers and walked to the bathroom. He waved at Yutong and said, "Prepare lunch. We'll go after lunch." "All right." Yutong smiled faintly. On the other side. On the lawn of Culver University's laboratory building. Under the dense bombardment of artillery shells, half of the lawn had been burnt to ashes. A few armored vehicles that had been reinforced with armor had been flattened into pieces of steel. Bullet casings and fragments were scattered all over the ground. Hulk, who was at the center of the battle, ignored the bullets that landed on his body. He destroyed the military vehicles wantonly. When the armed soldiers were grazed by him, they were all heavily injured and fell to the ground. "Amib, it's your turn to shine." General Ross suddenly shouted in the face of this situation. Under his command and under the soldiers' gazes, Amib appeared. Dressed in his military uniform, Amib looked like a savior as he strode forward confidently. His physique was clearly much taller. He was close to 1.9 meters tall and had a stocky build. His muscular arms carried a handheld gun. His iron-blooded and cold aura was indomitable. Amib had completed his genetic transformation in the super soldier medicine. Not only had his injuries healed, but he could also clearly feel that his body had become more than 5 times stronger. Symbol of peace, I've finally caught up. Amib's eyes shone. He was very confident and felt that he was invincible. Now, I'll kill Hulk first and use this battle to make my name as a hero. Amib roared in his heart. He boldly went forward and picked up his handheld gun. He aimed it at Hulk's chest and fired. Roar! Hulk roared angrily. He raised his arm and blocked the powerful cannon fire. Amib took advantage of the situation and moved forward step by step. The handheld gun kept firing. The recoil that was enough to injure an adult's arm was ignored by him as he continued to fire. Hulk's body stiffened. He was covered by the cannon fire, which served as a contrast to Amib's current strength. When the surrounding soldiers saw this, they began to cheer. Amib's lips curled into an arrogant smile. At this moment, a crisp sound was heard as he pulled the trigger. The handheld gun had run out of bullets. Hulk clapped his hands, and the shockwave extinguished the cannon fire. He bared his teeth angrily at Amib and took large strides forward to attack. You've come at the right time. I'll show you my current strength. Amib sneered and threw away the gun in his hand. With a speed that even an athlete could not reach, he squatted and jumped up. He punched out with his left fist. Close to a ton of strength was gathered and blasted out. It met Hulk's fist head-on. Crack! Amib's smile froze on his face. In an instant, the bones in his left hand shattered like an egg hitting a rock. His left wrist was broken at a 90-degree angle. Hulk's fist did not stop. It continued forward and landed on Amib's chest. Bam! Amib's body flew out horizontally. He rolled for more than 10 meters in the air and smashed into a big tree. Amib slid down to the roots of the tree. His eyes were wide open. A large fist mark had caved in on his chest. He could not stop vomiting blood. If not for his super soldier constitution, he would have died long ago. He stared at Hulk, who was not far away. Like a deflated balloon, his spirit and aura were dispirited. Chapter 247. As a new type of super soldier, Amib thought that he had crossed the peak and reached the unreachable pyramid in the clouds. Then, all of his confidence, hot-bloodedness, fantasies, and hopes dissipated like smoke under Hulk's punch. It was fine if his body was heavily injured, but the most important thing was his proud soul. It was as if someone had slapped him hard in the face, and his face burned and swelled. This isn't the script I wanted. Amib was furious and embarrassed. He was so depressed that a mouthful of hot blood rushed to his chest and throat. He spat out a mouthful of sticky blood, and his head leaned against a tree root as he fainted. From the moment Amib stepped onto the battlefield to the moment he was sent flying by Hulk's punch, only about 10 seconds had passed. The situation instantly became very awkward. Not only were the armed soldiers confused, even the commander, General Ross, had a forced smile on his face. He couldn't hide his frustration. General Ross had overestimated the power of the super soldier, and at the same time, he had underestimated the power of Hulk and Kale. Looking at the entire Earth, there really wasn't a single person who dared to compete with the two of them using only their physical strength. Amib was just a small interlude, and Hulk didn't care at all. He continued to use his terrifying power to violently fight the armed soldiers around him. Looking at the retreating army, the deputy commander retreated in fear. He looked at General Ross, who was still calm, and said anxiously, "General, if this continues, we'll probably be wiped out. Because we're in a university, we can't use many of our heavy weapons. What should we do now? What else can we do?" General Ross blew his beard and took a deep breath. He said in a deep voice, "Hurry up and invite the symbol of peace." At the same time, New York, in the office on the top floor of the Imperial Luxury Building. On the private dining table, it was filled with steaming hot food and precious wine. Yutong was like a unique scenery leaning on the side to wait on them. Kale, who had a napkin wrapped around his neck, picked up his knife and fork, and cut the medium-rare beef. He put it into his mouth and chewed carefully, savoring the juices within. Beep beep, the smartphone on the table vibrated slightly, and then Vice report sounded. Master, General Ross is calling to rush us again. At least wait for boss to finish his lunch? Yutong raised her eyebrows slightly and said with slight dissatisfaction. Kale acted as if he didn't hear them. He finished the entire piece of beef on his plate and took a sip of red wine. Only then did he clap his hands and stand. He smacked his lips and said, "It's fine if it's someone else, but Ross is the former instructor's son. We can't let him wait too long." Yutong stepped forward and carefully untied the napkin tied around his neck. Vice, vaguely. Of course, Vian, of Ross, of God, Vi yelled. Let's go then. Kyle shrugged and walked up the stairs, which led to the rooftop of the building. In less than half a minute, an eagle-shaped space warship floated from the rooftop of the Dihao building. The cold metal body of the warship entered a translucent stealth state. The advanced engines at the back roared slightly and started up at a speed faster than any aircraft on Earth. Like a silver stream of light, the space warship left New York and flew towards California at an extremely fast speed. Jarvis's air defense detection seemed to have detected it when it flew over the Stark Industries building. He warned with a loudspeaker, "Sir, Master seems to have left New York again. Godfather should be busy dealing with that guy named Hulk." Tawny wiped the sweat off his forehead. He was topless as he fiddled with various pipes and instruments. His gaze was serious and firm as he said, "I can't admit defeat either." In the main hall of the huge industrial building, countless complicated accelerator instruments and pipes were connected together. The basic structure of the Krypton manufacturing process had been formed. It had to be said that Tawny was indeed a genius engineer on Earth, and even in the universe. Culver University, on the vast grassland that had been turned into a battlefield. Bang! The Hulk was so angry that he charged forward like a rhinoceros. The armed soldiers fled in panic, and the armored vehicles that were left in place were sent flying into the air. They rolled on the grass and rolled for 10 meters before they died. The deputy commander reported in despair, "General, I've sent people to contact him, but the symbol of peace is still in New York. Even if he flies over at full speed, this university will be destroyed. Then stall for time for me." General Ross said calmly. "Yes." The deputy commander could only answer bitterly as he directed and encouraged the soldiers at the scene. No one noticed that a few hundred meters above their heads, there were a few wisps of extinguished white smoke in the air. A space warship was hovering in the air invisibly. The rear cabin was slowly opening, revealing Kyle, who was already completely covered in venom. His long and narrow scarlet eyes flickered with light, like a dark monster looking down indifferently. "Yutong, wait for me here for a moment." Kale let out a hoarse and sharp voice. He stepped out of the deck and jumped down, facing the strong wind. Yutong smiled and leaned on the edge of the deck. The strong wind blew her long black hair. Rip! Hulk had just torn a military vehicle in half with his bare hands and roared angrily. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and stopped moving. He looked up at the sky curiously. In his field of vision, a familiar tall figure and a dark hammer that was still fresh in his memory were rapidly magnifying. When Hulk wanted to react, it was already too late. Kale, who had rich battle experience, obviously wouldn't give him the chance. Ton. Using the momentum of falling from the sky, Kale swung the heavy hammer in his left hand that was fully charged and slammed it down on Hulk's forehead. This heavy blow was like the heavy blow of a god descending to the mortal world. Hulk suddenly knelt down and transmitted the force downwards. An invisible shockwave swept across the ground, and the grass couldn't withstand it and exploded. The soil and grass were completely detached from the ground and splashed in all directions in the strong wind. The soldiers and officers who witnessed this scene were dumbfounded. They were shocked beyond words. Only General Ross looked at the dark monster that rushed to the scene and forced himself to calm down. "He's here." Ignoring the armed soldiers around him, Kale landed on the ground and violently raised his left fist in the form of a heavy hammer. He aimed at the temporarily stunned Hulk in front of him and hammered him without any hesitation. The heavy hammer form consumed a lot of stamina, so he had to end the battle quickly. Kale knew very well that people didn't talk much. He treated Hulk as a huge punching bag and hammered his only weakness, the brain, causing him to remain stunned. Chapter 248. Boom. 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 At Culver University, where the crowd had been dispersed, ripples appeared on the artificial lake. Near the laboratory building, the ground shook as if there was a magnitude 5 earthquake. A large number of armed soldiers and military vehicles retreated to the edge of the lawn. The terrifying battle between the two monsters was unforgettable for the rest of their lives. The dark demon grinned and pressed Hulk to the ground. He waved his left fist and hammered Hulk non-stop. Every single one of the heavy hammers contained a terrifying impact force of at least tens of tons. Hulk was hammered to the ground. His brain was buzzing and he could not react. He could only growl unwillingly. His green eyes were wide open in anger. The ground was constantly shaking and shaking. The grassland was completely bare, and the ground had sunk down by more than half a meter. Grass and dust were still drifting in the air. Kyle grinned savagely as he exhaled hot air continuously. A large amount of his bodily functions were being consumed at a rapid rate, but his movements didn't slow down or stop in the slightest. He suppressed the Hulk with a barrage of attacks. It was easy to defeat Hulk, but it was much more difficult to kill Hulk. There was no need to do so. If he wanted to subdue and capture Hulk, other methods such as strong electric shocks and technological cages were not reliable. He could only use the most ancient method, knocking him unconscious. Hulk's resistance was strong, but with enough force, he would still faint and turn back into his human form. "I definitely have enough force. Is there something wrong with the place I'm hitting? Why hasn't he fainted yet?" Looking at Hulk, who was gritting his teeth, Kale was surprised. He swung his heavy hammer and hit Hulk's chin, causing him to fall back with his back against the ground. He was like a bulldozer that pushed the soil more than 10 meters away. Kale sprinted to catch up and changed to another place to continue hammering. It felt like a game of whack-a-mole. He hammered Hulk until he had a splitting headache. His hair was flattened, but he had not fainted yet. At the edge of the lawn, Elisa watched as Hulk was hammered. She was so heartbroken that she wanted to rush forward, but she was quickly stopped by her father, General Ross. The deputy commander took over the army on the spot. Seeing that the Hulk was at a disadvantage, he suddenly thought that this was a good opportunity to assist in the arrest. He quickly summoned a few armed soldiers and instructed them to show the secret weapons on the military vehicles. Boom! The heavy blow was like an explosion, sending Hulk flying once again. Kale's strong chest heaved up and down as he panted. Although he had used up more than half of his strength, his scarlet eyes grew brighter and brighter. After training with Hulk as a punching bag, he became more and more familiar with the hammer form, and the feeling of exerting force became more and more comfortable. Hulk's head was hit by the hammer, and the dizziness lasted from less than half a second to about 2 to 3 seconds. "Yes, I can knock it out and subdue it. I've won this battle." Kale grinned. He stomped on the ground, dragged the hammer in his left hand, and charged towards Hulk at a slightly slower speed. Hulk lay on the ground, his head swaying left and right as he struggled to stand up. At this moment, the sound of cars driving in could be heard from the surroundings. Kyle looked in the direction of the sound and saw that 2 military vehicles were starting up. The black cloth covering the rear compartment had been pulled away, revealing a huge megaphone-like instrument, which was aimed at the Hulk on the grass from 10 meters away. That can't be. Kale suddenly stopped in his tracks. He had a bad premonition. Then, under the command of the deputy commander, the loudspeaker was immediately activated. It emitted a strong and sharp ultrasonic wave, and the sound waves intertwined and continuously hit Hulk, who had just stood up. Hulk gritted his teeth and did not fall down. He desperately resisted the two waves of ultrasonic waves. On the other side, although he was not directly in front of the ultrasonic wave, he immediately retreated a dozen meters. In the aftermath of the ultrasonic wave, Kale, who was covered in venom, still fell straight to the ground as if he had been hit by a heavy blow. He covered his ears with his hands, and his face twisted in pain even more than Hulk's. In his brain, Venom was screaming in extreme pain. Although Venom was already an adult and was more than 100 times stronger than when he was born, he still had a fatal flaw. He was extremely afraid of high temperature and sound waves. Immediately, Kale was forced to disarm the hammer in his left hand. Then, the dark coat on his body gradually melted like frost under the sun. Obviously, Venom could no longer maintain the symbiotic state. Seeing this, General Ross's eyes widened. He gritted his teeth and growled, "Who turned on the ultrasonic wave?" What's wrong?" The deputy commander turned around and scratched his head in confusion. In the face of the ultrasonic wave, Hulk roared angrily. He suddenly picked up two pieces of the military vehicle's outer shell from the ground, used one as a shield, and threw the other one out. Pfft! Before the deputy commander could turn around, his body was smashed into meat paste by a piece of the outer shell. The steel outer shell did not slow down and cut the ultrasonic instrument behind it in half. The Hulk leaped up and bounced more than 10 meters away, smashing the ultrasonic instrument on another military vehicle into pieces, and the parts fell to the ground with tinkling sounds. Hulk stood on a pile of scrap metal and glanced around. The armed soldiers had lost their will to fight and retreated. He did not chase after them. Instead, his furious gaze fell on a place 30 meters away. There. Kale had returned to his original human form. He climbed up from the grass with a slightly pale face. He looked like he had just been fished out of the water. His casual clothes were dripping with sweat. Don't be afraid of a godlike opponent, but be afraid of a pig-like teammate. This saying is indeed true. Kale sighed helplessly. He held the Venom card with 2 fingers and put it back into the card space. Roar! Hulk roared angrily. It was as if the tide had turned. He raised the steel outer shell with both hands and threw it in the direction of Kale. Then I have no choice but to rely on myself. Kale shrugged and raised his eyes. His golden eyes were burning with a bright flame. His sweat-soaked clothes were instantly dried and a golden flame began to rise from the surface of his body. He looked at the flying piece of steel and did not dodge. Instead, he quickly raised his left hand. The front of the steel outer shell became red-hot when it was 3 meters away. 1 meter further, it melted into molten iron and splashed on the grass in front of him. What is going on? Outside the lawn, all the onlookers were stunned. This was far more shocking than the Hulk's monstrous strength. Not only that. Even though they were dozens of meters away, they could feel the temperature in the air rising rapidly. The temperature suddenly became hot and dry. Chapter 249. With his divine power circulating, Kale raised both of his hands. Golden flames ignited on the surface of his body. The flames wrapped around his casual clothes like a thin and luxurious flame windbreaker draped over his body. Under the power of the divine flames, the surviving plants within a 5-meter radius of the grassland withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even the air seemed to be slightly distorted under the high temperature. The heat wave rushed in all directions like a tidal wave, forcing the surrounding soldiers to sweat profusely and retreat endlessly. This was the first time Kale used his divine body to release his divine flames in front of the public. The tip of the iceberg of his strength finally surfaced. It's Kale, the symbol of peace. The one Hulk fought just now was indeed him. He's probably the only one in the world who can deal with that monster. The armed soldiers were pleasantly surprised. They all breathed a sigh of relief and discussed excitedly. The battle seemed to have transformed into a large-scale idle meeting. The appearance of the man in front of them undoubtedly gave them a boost of confidence. The reason was that he was Kale, the symbol of peace. Since 70 years ago, he had never lost. His appearance could turn the tide of a battle. He was recognized by the world as an undefeated legend and was called the first hero of God. Roar! Hulk roared angrily. He did not care who the enemy in front of him was. He ignored the heat wave and jumped down from the scrap metal. It rushed towards Kyle like a ferocious beast, and the ground began to shake as it ran. No matter who the enemy was, Hulk was barehanded. He could destroy everything with a pure punch of 100 tons. Facing Hulk, who was approaching him, Kale took a deep breath. The golden flames spun around his arm as the axis. The divine flames accumulated between his fingers and he clenched them into a fist little by little. Condensed divine power. Kale threw a punch forward. It was not a punch, but a burning pillar of fire. Hulk suddenly stopped. He raised his thick arms and blocked the destructive flames. The flames hit his strong muscles and green skin, splashing bright sparks all over the sky. Heatwaves surged, and the golden divine flames reached a temperature of over 1,000 degrees. It was enough to scorch the earth, and the grass and soil on the surface of the flames melted into boiling lava. However, Hulk took the brunt of the flames head-on and remained standing. The flames brushed past his arms and chest and parted to both sides, unable to inflict any real damage. This physique is truly incomprehensible to the point of being abnormal. Seeing this scene, even Kale couldn't help but curse inwardly. He had no doubt that even if he threw Hulk into the crater of a volcano, it would be able to take a comfortable bath in the bubbling lava. Kale did not waste any more of his god power. With a twist of his left hand, the flames that were gushing out from his hand stopped and dispersed. Hulk let out a low growl and sprinted forward again. He was now within 3 meters. Since I can't do anything to you with my divine power alone, I'll try this. Kale's golden eyes flashed. He licked his dry lips and quickly pulled out an item card from the card space. The item card materialized as soon as it appeared. It was a damaged metal axe with only the handle and the tip remaining. It looked like an ancient short spear, and Kale held it firmly in his right hand. The weapon that the god of war had used to kill gods, the god of war axe. When Planet Sokka was still a super soldier, Kale could not move it even if he used both hands with all his strength. Now that his physique had been strengthened tenfold with the help of god genes, this damaged divine weapon could be used with one hand and its weight was just right. Kale held the god of war axe in his hand. As there was no blade, he did not make any slashing motions. Instead, he used the tip of the axe as a spear and stabbed it at Hulk. Slap! Hulk reacted quickly. He moved his hands closer to his chest and clapped them. In the collision of flames and wind, the tip of the divine axe was caught between his strong and swollen green palms. Let go of it. Kale did not want to compete with Hulk in terms of strength. The golden divine flames on the surface of his body burned brightly as he channeled his divine power into the divine axe. On the surface, it looked like the blazing flames were continuously gathering towards the divine axe, causing it to become even hotter and more destructive as if it was charging. The reason why divine weapons were called divine weapons was because they could complement the divine power of the god race. Ordinary cold weapons, even if they were not melted by the divine flames, would weaken the power of the flames. But now, the divine axe was constantly absorbing the divine flames and increasing its power. Hulk lowered his body and held the tip of the divine axe tightly with both hands. He roared and stepped forward, pushing Kale back by 1 meter. Let's see how long you can hold it. Kale sneered. He poured his divine power into the divine axe, increasing the temperature of the tip of the axe. 1000 degrees Celsius was just the beginning. Soon, it jumped to 2000 degrees Celsius and showed no signs of stopping. When the temperature reached 5000 degrees Celsius, the tip of the divine axe was as red as fire. Hulk's palms started to sizzle and emit a few wisps of green smoke. The heat wave made the fountain hundreds of meters away start to smoke. Roar! Hulk roared unwillingly. His anger was mixed with pain. He finally let go of the axe. The divine axe carried the fierce flames. The tip of the divine axe struck his chest and sent his huge body flying. Luckily, it's effective. Kale heaved a sigh of relief. He was not sure just now. No matter how high Hulk's resistance to heat was, there would always be a limit. Now, it seemed that 5000 degrees Celsius was enough to hurt him. Of course, 5000 degrees Celsius was the maximum temperature he could reach with his divine power. Hulk was like a cockroach that could not be killed. He climbed up energetically from the ground and pouted to blow at his burning palms. There was an obvious burn mark on his chest. An angry and violent aura rose from his body. Blue veins popped out all over his muscles. He continued to charge forward unwillingly. The damage of this broken axe is not enough. Kale frowned. Suddenly, he thought of something and his golden eyes lit up slightly. That's right. In addition to the broken axe in his hand, there was a complete divine weapon in the card space. He just did not know if that item was an offensive divine weapon. Kale thought. He waved his left hand and an item card materialized. It was a golden fire disc in his left hand. An extremely ordinary flame burned in the disc. The eternal flame. How do I use this thing? Kale looked at the fire disc in his left hand in astonishment. He concentrated his divine power but could not control the internal flame. He could not activate it to release any power. Whether it was on the outside or on the inside, it was like an ordinary flame. Without waiting for Kyle to study it thoroughly, the Hulk violently approached him, and as usual, his heavy fist fell with a roar. Kale's pupils contracted. He instinctively raised the fire disc and flipped it 180 degrees. He slapped it hard and put it on top of Hulk's head. The eternal flame within raged downwards and covered half of Hulk's body. Roar! Chapter 250. The Eternal Fire. It was a ball of fire from the beginning of the universe, a flame that had been burning since ancient times. Stars were formed in the explosion, giving birth to life, extinguishing life, depleting energy, freezing, or exploding into black holes. The Milky Way was born from a dark and barren land. Countless races were created over hundreds of millions of years, and millions of stars were shining brightly with the light of civilization. This ball of fire was still burning, so it was called the Eternal Fire. Rather than calling it a fire, it was more accurate to call it the concrete rules of the universe. This ball of eternal fire contained the profound power of rebirth and destruction. But now, Kale was holding this fire and using it as a weapon to cover Hulk's head. If the former owner of the Eternal Fire, the Flame Giant, knew about this, he would probably squat in his cave and sigh. If Goddess Hela knew about this, she would probably break out of her cage and rush to Earth with her sword. If God King Odin, who was far away in the divine territory, knew about this, he would probably be stunned for a moment. This was the eternal fire that was comparable to the cosmic origin stone. Couldn't he show some respect? Kale heard Hulk's screams and the sizzling sound of white smoke. This effect also gave him a big shock. He hurriedly picked up the golden fire plate again. Huff, the golden fire plate was upright, and the eternal fire inside was still burning on its own. It did not extinguish at all, nor did it grow stronger. Kale relaxed and looked at Hulk in front of him. His golden pupils suddenly shrank, revealing a look of shock. Hulk's current appearance was a little too pitiful. He was still rolling on the ground in pain. More than half of his inch-long hair had been burned away. The monster's face and firm chest were charred black, like raw meat on a fire pit that had been roasted until it was half-cooked. One had to know that this was Hulk. His skin was immune to firearms and bullets. Heavy hammers with dozens of tons of impact force and divine flames of 5,000 degrees Celsius were only superficial wounds. But now, he had been roasted until he was half-cooked under the eternal fire? Kale smacked his lips. The extremely prickly Hulk was cooked to the point of fragrant aroma after being roasted by the eternal fire? What he didn't know was that all creatures were treated the same in front of the eternal fire. Although it only had the power of a normal flame, it was a burning that ignored all defenses. Not only was Kale stunned, but the surrounding soldiers and officers were also bewildered as they stared blankly at the burnt Hulk on the ground. Roar! Hulk was injured and curled up on the ground. His huge body was like a deflated balloon. His body was shrinking to the size of an ordinary person, and the green color on his body was fading rapidly. Under everyone's gaze, Hulk turned back into Bruce Banner, who was topless and wearing a pair of large underpants. Kale fell silent as he knew that the battle had come to an end. He then kept the Eternity Fire and Ares' axe back into the card space. Banner. Outside the battlefield, Elisa broke free from the soldiers' restraints and rushed forward while they were still in a daze. She knelt on the ground and hugged the unconscious Bruce as she called out his name with tears in her eyes. "All soldiers, move according to my orders." General Ross walked out and waved his hand. The armed soldiers behind him swarmed forward and surrounded Bruce, Elisa, and Kale. General Ross looked at Kale and said respectfully and politely, "Mr. Kale, thank you very much for your help this time." Kale nodded coldly and didn't say anything. "Father, please let Banner go," Elisa pleaded as she hugged Bruce. "I'm sorry." General Ross shook his head and ordered the surrounding soldiers coldly, "Arrest the target criminal, Bruce Banner, and bring him back to the military base. Execute immediately." "Yes." The collective soldiers obeyed the order and moved forward to take Bruce away. Elisa cried and tried to stop them, but she couldn't do anything. In the end, she could only look at Kale with hope. "Mr. Kale, please." Elisa knelt on the ground and begged. She knew that only the man in front of her had the ability to stop them. "Elisa." General Ross frowned and said to Kale apologetically, "Mr. Kale. I'm sorry, my daughter is still young and doesn't know any better. Please. She's already 30 years old and still young. It's okay." Kale shrugged. Before General Ross could smile, he continued, "But you can't take Bruce Banner away." "Huh?" General Ross's face froze. At the same time, several armed soldiers stopped at the same time and didn't dare to move Bruce on the ground. General Ross took a deep breath nervously and asked hesitantly, "Mr. Kale, why can't I take him away?" "Because I want to take him away." Kale looked at him calmly and said matter-of-factly, "Oh right, I'm now the chief consultant of SHELD. You can contact the people at SHELD for more details." SHELD. General Ross's face changed slightly. Of course, he knew about SHELD. It was an independent and mysterious department that wasn't restricted by the United States. It was directly under the management of the United Nations and its duties and authority were very centralized. In the United States, the local military generally had to cooperate with SHELD. If it was a normal SHELD agent, General Ross, as a general, could still arrest Bruce by force. However, the other party was Kale. Which one of Kale's personal identities wasn't much more important than SHELD's chief consultant? Ross sighed and said in a low voice, "Then, let's hand him over to SHELD for now. I'll talk to them about the details." Kale nodded and clapped his hands lightly. As if following his call, a faint beam of light broke through the sky. It deliberately avoided the soldiers and shone on Cale and Bruce. That's... General Ross raised his head in shock. Tens of meters in the sky, he could vaguely see the bottom of a space warship. Goodbye first, Cale said calmly. He and Bruce's bodies floated up slightly and were about to fly towards the space warship in the sky. Mr. Cale. Elisa called out to him and asked anxiously, "Can I go with Banna?" "Elisa, you're not allowed to go." General Ross's words were laced with anger. "It doesn't matter." Cale thought for a moment and smiled faintly. "Ross, I'll get someone to look after your daughter and make sure she comes back safely." Cale raised his finger and the beam of light enveloped Elisa's body. The three of them were enveloped in the beam of light and floated towards the interior of the space warship. It was as if they were being swallowed by the space warship. With a jet of flames, the space warship changed direction in the air and turned into a stream of light as it flew back towards New York. "General, what should we do now?" An armed soldier asked in surprise as he watched the space warship leave. "What else can we do?" General Ross's beard trembled slightly as he looked around. The lawn was unrecognizable under the bombardment of artillery and divine flames. There were also dead and injured soldiers. Chapter 251. Speaking of which, it was strange. Hulk was transformed from Bruce's anger. However, Hulk was badly burned by the eternal fire. After he transformed back into his human form, the burns on his body disappeared. Although Bruce was still unconscious, his slightly curly hair was still there. His naked upper body was white and tender, as if the one who went through the battle wasn't him. Hulk, in the cabin, Cale looked at Bruce in Elisa's arms and narrowed his eyes. Hulk and Bruce's coexistence was a bit like Venom and him. Although they shared the same body, they were not the same creature. Since Bruce wasn't burned, it saved Cale a lot of time. He ordered Vice to return to the Dehao Tower in New York and sent a message to two places. One was the headquarters of SHELD, and the other was the Stark Building. When the space warship landed on the rooftop of the Dehao Tower like a silver stream of light, a red-haired woman was already waiting on the rooftop. Cale came out of the cabin and looked up. Who else could it be but Black Widow Natasha? "Master." Seeing Cale, Natasha immediately knelt down on one knee. While she represented the deputy director of SHELD, she was also a member of Family Cal. She was also an elite spy of the Unnatural firm. "You came so quickly?" Cale was a little surprised. "Your battle at Culver University has already spread to SHELD. I came here in advance and happened to see your message." Natasha smiled charmingly. At this moment, she saw Elisa pushing the unconscious Bruce off the plane in a wheelchair. Her beautiful eyes flashed with a strange light as she asked curiously, "Yes. Didn't the new alliance need high-end combat power? This is the candidate I recommended." Cale shrugged and said, "Let's go to the conference hall first." Dehao Tower, Conference Hall. Cale sat in the main seat, while Yutong stood behind him. Her delicate hands were massaging his shoulders, which had become tense because of the battle. After he personally informed Bruce's girlfriend, Elisa, that Bruce would be fine, Elisa was willing to leave the conference hall, leaving the unconscious Bruce in the hall. Natasha, on the other hand, was observing Bruce carefully. She was curious as to why this young professor, who didn't seem dangerous at all, was actually the green-skinned monster that the armed forces couldn't do anything to. They didn't have to wait for long before a faint arc of light suddenly flashed in the sky outside the French window. They could see a golden-red Iron Man rapidly approaching and hovering outside the window. Dong! Dong! Iron Man knocked on the glass window in a gentlemanly manner. He pushed open the window and walked into the conference hall under the daylight lamp. He then sat down on one of the sofas in a very familiar manner. Due to the titanium alloy steel coat, the weight of the soft leather sofa caused it to collapse. Tawny. Kale saw this and shook his head helplessly. Ever since Tawny revealed his identity as Iron Man, he had been cooped up in the studio all day long. He didn't even like to drive a sports car when he went out on some occasions. Instead, he flew all over the city in his Iron Man suit. Godfather. I just came out of the studio and didn't change my clothes, so I'll wear this suit for the meeting. Picking up the helmet, Tawny showed a tired face with a smile on his face. In this way, the members of the newly formed The Avengers were basically all present. Tawny's eyes fell on Bruce, who was still unconscious. Similar to Natasha, he asked in surprise, "He is Hulk?" "He doesn't look like him. He can transform." Kale smiled and glanced at the electronic watch on his left wrist. "Vice, can you wake him up?" The watch automatically fell off his wrist and fell on the smooth floor of the hall. It unfolded its irregular mechanical form and transformed into a small robot. "Hello everyone, I'm Master's personal butler, Vice." The robot was quite gentlemanly as he bowed and saluted everyone. Cough. On the table, the Iron Man's helmet started flashing and made a special greeting that came from Jarvis. Weiss and J.R.V.I.S. had gotten to know each other after a fight. Under everyone's surprised gaze, Weiss skipped to Bruce's feet and put his hand on his bare skin. He quickly diagnosed, "He's not injured, but his mind is still a little confused, so he's still in a coma. In this situation, you just need to electrocute him." After that, his small mechanical arm really did send out an electric shock. The weak electric arc was transmitted to Bruce's body, causing his body to twitch in physiological reactions. "Don't roast me!" Bruce exclaimed. His eyes widened, and his face was still full of horror. "See, it's done." Weiss spread his hands and stepped aside. "Where am I? Who are you guys?" Bruce looked around blankly. Under the gazes of the silver-haired young man, the woman in the leather jacket, and the half-Iron Man, he almost asked 3 questions in a row. Kale said calmly, "This is the first time we're meeting." "No, I've already met the other you twice and fought twice." "The other me? You fought Hulk? And you're still safe?" Bruce was shocked as he looked at Kale. Apart from being shocked, he felt that the silver-haired young man in front of him was very familiar. Right, he looked very similar to a statue in Culver University. Bruce trembled as he said in disbelief, "You're the symbol of peace." "The real person?" Kale nodded calmly. He had really become a living fossil. Everyone on Earth was shocked when they saw him. Cough, cough. "Professor Banner, we've met before. Have you forgotten?" Tawny coughed softly. He felt helpless. As long as Godfather was around, he had to take the initiative to make his presence known. Bruce was already awake. He looked at him and said in realization, "Yes. You and I met at a scientific conference 5 years ago. You're the chairman of Stark Industries, Mr. Stark. But why are you wearing a steel jacket?" "Well." Tawny scratched his head awkwardly. He couldn't say that he was used to pretending to be cool. Natasha crossed her legs and finally said, "You definitely don't know me. I'm Natasha Karl, the current deputy director of SHELD. Symbol of Peace, Stark Industries, SHELD. Bruce became more and more shocked. He frowned and asked the biggest question in his heart, "Why am I here?" "You'll have to ask the Hulk in your body." Natasha smiled and explained, "You just became Hulk and fought with Kale at a university in California. Then, you were defeated and returned to your human form. Before the army could arrest you, Kale brought you here first." This was a bit too much information. Bruce's mind raced as he looked at them nervously. "Then what do you want to do to me?" "What do we want to do?" "It depends on your next choice." Tawny wanted to touch his chin, but just as he raised his hand, he realized that he was wearing a steel jacket. He hurriedly lowered his arm and said softly, "We want to invite you to join a team. The Avengers." Kyle continued Bruce's unfinished words and looked at the confused Bruce with sparkling eyes. Chapter 252. Team. Bruce was stunned. For years ago, when he was attacked by gamma radiation, he would transform into Hulk when he was angry. Once someone found out about his true identity, they would either capture him or study him. Today was the first time someone had invited him to join the team. "There is a monster living in my body," Bruce said bitterly with a solemn expression. "It is because you can transform into Hulk that we came to you." Natasha smiled. "The Avengers need inhuman elites. Without any special abilities, it is impossible to fight against the enemies that the team has to face. Mr. Banner, you must know that no one here is ordinary." Tawny blinked and tapped on his steel jacket. Bruce gritted his teeth and said, "But transforming into Hulk is a genetic disease. I have tried my best to find a way to cure it and return to a normal life." The hall was silent for a moment. Hulk was powerful, but it was difficult to control. It was a double-edged sword. "Bruce." Kale suddenly spoke and looked at him calmly. "Why do you think Hulk is a disease? It's not an unconventional mutation or evolution." Bruce heard this and lowered his head. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Hulk is a monster that has lost himself. How can it be a benign evolution? Think about it. If there was no Hulk, would you still be sitting here and talking to us?" Kale hit the nail on the head. Bruce fell silent. He nodded with difficulty and said, "I have to admit that I have been saved countless times by the Hulk, whom I loathe. That explains it." Kale looked at him and said directly, "You just don't want to face the other side of your superpower. You treat it as a symptom of a disease. You keep trying to cure it, control it, and kill it. How can it not be angry and violent?" Bruce was speechless. Kale shook his head. This was the mindset of the people on Earth that could not be changed in a short time. The minority obeys the majority and seeks those who are similar to exclude those who are different. This is the social experience that has been formed since ancient times. One day, when you become a superhuman and live in human society, you won't feel proud and superior because of your superpower. Instead, you will worry about being ostracized by others and want to create a shell to disguise yourself as an ordinary person. Bruce Banner was a highly educated scientist, but he still couldn't ignore the eyes of the people around him. He couldn't stand his mutated Hulk's ugliness and horror. He was conflicted about it day and night. More importantly, there was no suitable environment and identity for him to live under the sun. "Mr. Banner, you have to think carefully." Natasha stared at Bruce and said in a deep voice, "Even if you cure yourself now and stop turning into Hulk, you will still be Hulk for the rest of your life. The sins it committed when it lost control will always be on your shoulders. To put it simply, if it weren't for us, you would have been locked up in the military prison. Considering how dangerous you are, you would have been sentenced to at least life imprisonment," Tawny added. "Looks like I don't have a choice." Bruce smiled bitterly. He finally understood that he had been seen through. Although it was a choice, he didn't have a choice at all. This is an opportunity, a turning point in your life. Natasha smiled and promised on behalf of SHELD, the Avengers are the first hero team on Earth. They will only deal with external threats that threaten the survival of mankind. As long as you join as Hulk, you will be able to get rid of all the crimes on your body. Bruce's eyes lit up slightly. This promise was too lethal for his current situation. Kale shrugged. He knew that the meeting was about to end. Hit him with a stick and give him a candy. This was a tactic that worked every single time. Bruce looked troubled. "I've never thought of destroying or killing people. I've always insisted on contributing to the world's science, but I can't control Hulk after transforming. Don't worry. Everyone here will have a way to suppress Hulk in the future. Kale crossed his arms and said confidently. He had already proven with his actions that the eternal fire would be a huge shadow for Hulk. Yutong's mind was extremely strong. She could slightly control other people's minds. Hulk, who was mentally weak, was no match for her. Tawny didn't have to worry either. As long as he had enough time, Hulk wouldn't have anything to do with the anti-Hulk armor. As for Natasha, everyone knew what the Black Widow was capable of. Bruce was relieved. He sighed and said, "Then I'll try my best." Then it's settled. Natasha was delighted. This way, even if Kale didn't appear, the Avengers would have enough high-level combat power. Natasha took out her phone and made a call. After giving a few orders coldly and domineeringly, she hung up the phone and said, "Okay, Bruce Banner. Your crime has been removed from the file." It's that simple? Bruce's mouth was wide open. What else do you think? Calm down. You'll be even more shocked by the things that happen in this team in the future. Natasha rolled her eyes at him. The Avengers used the entire SHELD as their logistics and recruited superheroes as their core members. They were a powerful team that transcended the mortal world. Since it's all settled, let's have lunch here. Godfather, Tawny suggested. He leaned back on the sofa. His weight completely crushed the sofa. He touched his stomach, but all he felt was a hard steel shell. Kale nodded and said, "Yutong, get someone to prepare lunch." Half an hour later, a luxurious dining table was arranged in the hall. There was good wine and delicious food. It was a private meal, and the waitresses were all female members of Family Cal. This was equivalent to the first banquet of the Avengers. Bruce was obviously very hungry. He didn't care about Western etiquette and directly ate half of the roasted chicken. His girlfriend, Elisa, had a worried look on her face. She patted his back to help him. Tawny, who had changed into a suit, put on a white napkin, and elegantly cut the meat on his plate with a knife and fork. Kale had just eaten. He sat at the head of the table and only tasted the wine in his glass. Yutong sat with a bottle of wine and poured half of the empty glass for him. She looked at him with her beautiful eyes with a smile. Natasha was in high spirits. She wanted to call Hawkeye and ask him to come and drink with her. In this beautiful and peaceful atmosphere, suddenly, Vice's communication beeped. "Master, there's news from General Ross." Vice jumped to a corner of the table and said. "What news?" Kale asked in surprise. "Wasn't it over?" Vice reported, "Hulk appeared on a busy street in California. He's now wreaking havoc on the streets." "What?" As soon as these words were spoken, everyone in the hall turned to look at Bruce. "Huh?" Chapter 253. In the conference hall. "Hulk, are you kidding me?" Bruce put down his drumstick with a serious expression. He was not going to take the blame. Kyle frowned and thought of the main point. He asked, "Bruce, has your serum been leaked to the outside world?" "Serum?" Bruce was stunned. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead as everyone looked at him. He nodded hurriedly and said, "I remember now. I did send the serum to a scientist friend some time ago and asked him to help me decipher the Hulk gene." "Send it, quickly." Tawny pursed his lips. "That's not the point." Natasha glanced at him and sighed. "Don't tell me another Hulk has been born." "Vice. Connect to the military camera over there and let us see the situation," Kale said calmly. Vice's mechanical eyes turned and emitted a blue light. It was a holographic projection and a live broadcast. First, there were screams and screams. The camera in the video was shaky. It was a bustling street in the middle of the city. Cars were jammed, and countless pedestrians were running in all directions. At the end of the street, there was a huge green beast wandering around wantonly. The police and military started to evacuate the pedestrians. At the same time, army green armored vehicles drove into the street and pushed forward to suppress the beast. Boom! A rocket launcher shell hit the green beast accurately. Flames and air waves exploded. A huge palm reached out from within and closed inwards like a palm leaf fan. The strong wind created by the palm blew away the fiery waves. A pair of cruel and cold eyes looked at the camera. Most of the people in the conference hall gasped. It was a creature that resembled the Hulk, but its physique was even stronger than the Hulk's. Its entire body and head were bald, and its muscles protruded from its hideous bones. There was also a row of barbed white teeth on its back. The creature in front of them was much uglier and more brutal than Hulk. It was like a cold-blooded monster from a bloody hell. Abomination, Kale muttered. Subduing Hulk was much faster than in the original plot. Originally, he wanted to prevent the appearance of the abomination, but he didn't expect Bruce's serum to be leaked in advance. Vice, get to work. Kale didn't think too much about it. After drinking the wine in his cup, he stood up from the main seat and quietly held the poison card between his 2 fingers. Godfather. Tawny raised his hand and looked at the abomination in the video, saying with interest, I'm free, so I'll go with you and test out the recently improved steel jacket. Sure. Kale nodded. Just as the 2 of them were heading upstairs, Bruce suddenly stood up and requested, I'll go with you. Are you sure? Natasha looked at him in surprise. Hulk was too uncontrollable now. If it were to cause more trouble, the consequences would be unimaginable. As the deputy director of SHELD, she had to consider this as her top priority. I'm sure. Bruce took out a tissue and wiped the grease off his mouth. He said seriously, it's because I'm a product of the serum. It's my duty to stop its rampage. And if I can't adapt to Hulk's transformation, it'll be useless even if I join the Avengers. It doesn't matter. If it goes out of control, I'll suppress it together. Kale's casual words made the whole hall go silent. Tawny and the others felt more at ease. This was too reliable, okay. Then I'll go with you, Natasha said after thinking for a while. Does this count as the first operation of the Avengers? Tawny couldn't help but laugh. Then let's go. Kale summoned Venom and walked in front, leading everyone to the rooftop. California. Bustling Main Street. Boom boom boom. The cars on the road were like plastic toys. The abomination picked them up and threw them everywhere. They hit the buildings and caused a series of local explosions. Flames and smoke rose everywhere. In the surroundings, the military's bullets and shells were concentrated and poured down. They landed on the green bone shell and bounced off. The abomination glanced at them coldly. It kept picking up the cars on the road and smashing them in the direction of the army. The explosion covered half the street. Symbol of peace, come out, the abomination roared hoarsely. That's right, it was Emib. The world-class top soldier, the new super soldier that was later enhanced by genes, and now the abomination that was injected with Hulk serum. After being seriously injured twice in a row, it transformed at a low point. After the fusion of the super soldier and Hulk's genes, it couldn't turn back into a human, but it felt that its body contained endless power. Symbol of peace, the abomination roared again. It was about to clear out the army when a familiar and calm voice came from behind. You're looking for me. Its body froze, and then it turned around abruptly. The silver-haired Kale, wearing a hooded leather jacket, was standing less than 5 meters away from it. A pair of dark wings were retracted on his back. You're really here. The abomination grinned. I'm here to send you on your way, Kale said calmly. Do you still have the confidence to win against me now? The abomination picked up the car beside it, raised it above its head, and was about to smash it at Kale. "Who said I'm going to fight you one-on-one?" Kale looked at it as if it was an idiot. He stood there without moving, without any intention of dodging. Whoosh whoosh. Just then, 2 blinding lasers landed on the car first, causing it to explode prematurely in the abomination's hands. Retracting its hands, the abomination shook its head. The back of its head was a little charred from the explosion nearby. "Who?" It looked around angrily. "Godfather, you're really fast." Iron Man flew down from the sky and landed on the road with a clang, standing side by side with Kale. He raised his hands, which were filled with blinding lasers, and aimed them at the abomination in front of him. He didn't forget to remind it politely, "Green-skinned monster, please raise your ferocious claws." "Who are you?" the abomination continued to ask coldly. "You can call me Iron Man. We're the Avengers. By the way, there's one more member who's about to." Before Iron Man could finish his words, Bruce's wail could be heard from the sky, coming closer and closer. Crack crack. Bruce fell in free fall and hit the concrete ground between Kale and Iron Man, creating a human-shaped crater. The abomination, Kale, Iron Man covered his mask with his hand and didn't look at the crater. He said awkwardly, "Pretend I didn't say the last sentence." "I don't know him." Crack. The ground trembled slightly. The crack in the human-shaped crater expanded, and a thick green monster hand reached out from it. Hulk climbed out of it. The hair on its head hadn't healed yet, and it was slightly charred. It let out an angry roar filled with a violent aura and sent the Iron Man standing beside it flying with a punch. But when Hulk looked to the right and saw Kale's calm face, its terrifying aura suddenly weakened, and extreme fear appeared on its face. It was afraid of the eternal fire. Whoosh, Iron Man flew back to the arena, avoided Hulk, and stood carefully on Kale's left. "Then let's start." Kale spread his hands. A layer of tough dark cuticle appeared from his chest and extended to his limbs and neck, covering his entire body. The Dark Demon, Hulk, and Iron Man. They were all villains. Chapter 254. Compared to Hulk, the Abomination seemed to have evolved to be more powerful and perfect. However, in Kale's opinion, the Abomination's evolution had gone completely astray. Hulk was on the verge of a malignant mutation. Fortunately, he was divided into 2 separate personalities. The human personality and the Hulk personality were in a state of balance, forcing the 2 to restrain each other to maintain the balance. As for the Abomination, all the genes in its body had been deformed. It no longer had the personality of a human and could no longer become a normal human. Its body and mind had completely become an uncontrollable cold-blooded monster. After defeating Hulk, Kale did not need to test his combat power by going to the extreme of the Abomination. Therefore, he chose to join forces with Hulk and Iron Man to quell the chaos as soon as possible. End this quickly. Clenching his left fist, Kale's scarlet eyes glowed. The dark muscles on his left fist quickly expanded into a hammer. Venom was completely covered in heavy hammer form. Before he moved, Hulk could not hold back and rushed out. 2 streams of hot air came out of his nostrils. His open palms collided with the Abomination's horns. Kale shrugged. With a flap of his wings, the dark figure disappeared, leaving only a turbulent white vortex on the ground. A supersonic attack. The Abomination was confident that its strength was not inferior to Hulk's. In fact, it was slightly stronger. However, just as it was about to push Hulk to the ground, it felt a sudden chill on the back of its neck. Clang! With a heavy hammer from above, the back of the Abomination's head was hit by a powerful hammer. The cement ground under its feet could not withstand the pressure and collapsed inch by inch until it reached half a meter. Kale appeared behind it. His body was suspended low in the air, the heavy hammer in his left hand still in a hammering position. It was as if it had been hit by a stick. The abomination rolled its eyes. Its ears were ringing and its head was dizzy for about half a second. In that half a second, Hulk had taken back the initiative. He bent the abomination's weak arms and pushed its huge body to the ground. Before the abomination could wake up, Hulk was sitting on its thick waist, roaring in anger and excitement. He clenched his fists and punched the abomination's chest heavily. Facing this situation, even the abomination wanted to curse. Just as it opened its ferocious bloody mouth, the Iron Man swept past from the side of the sky, and then two bright lasers pierced through the air. With the perfect timing and angle, the laser went straight into the abomination's black throat. The abomination suddenly widened its bloodshot eyes and subconsciously closed its mouth, burping out black smoke. Then, Kale's heavy hammer came one after another, this time landing on its temple. It had to be said that Sledgehammer was clearly capable of fighting head-on, but now it was being used for sneak attacks. Instead, it caused the enemy to feel extremely depressed and disgusted. Kale, who had always been the main attacker, suddenly chose to use a semi-support method, which was to stun him. Hulk's fists and Iron Man's laser continued to fill in the gaps in the battle. All this happened in the blink of an eye. Facing the siege of 3 villains, the abomination could not even finish a sentence, let alone fight back. It was pressed to the ground and beaten violently without any suspense. At the edge of the battle area that was sealed off by the military, armed soldiers with a series of firearms, as well as General Ross, who had hurried over, looked at the scene in front of them, dumbfounded. Just a moment ago, the powerful abomination that ignored the military and wreaked havoc on the streets arrogantly and domineeringly shouted for the symbol of peace to come and fight. The next moment, the abomination made the Dark Demon, Hulk, and Iron Man collectively grind on the ground, unable to even stand up under the intensive attack. The entire street area was rumbling and shaking, on the verge of cracking, and dust was flying everywhere. Hulk's fists and Kale's heavy fists were like iron hammers, blocking the abomination's body. It was as if they were tempering steel, bombarding and hammering non-stop. Every time the abomination roared, there would be 2 glaring lasers exploding, causing the roars to turn into painful whimpers. This could no longer be considered a battle, it should be called a large-scale torture scene. The road where the battle was at kept collapsing, the water pipes and the ground within a 10-meter radius burst one after another. After a loud roar, the road collapsed, creating a large empty hole. The abomination disappeared into the hole as if it had been freed. Kale, Hulk, and Iron Man surrounded the collapsed hole in a triangular formation, the 3 of them staring at each other. Oh no, that was too strong. Crack. With the hole as the starting point, a crack appeared in the middle of the road, and the crack was still rapidly extending outwards. It was the abomination. That guy was actually digging a tunnel underground, trying to escape through the earth. Tawny. Kale called out. Understood. Iron Man was very smart. He did not need Kale to explain to know his intentions. Iron Man's hands were pressed against his thighs, and the engine of his steel-clad palms and feet roared. After circling at a low altitude, he accelerated into the large hole in the ground and chased after the abomination underground. Kale spread his wings and soared into the sky. Together with Hulk, they chased after the abomination through the crack, one in the air and one on land. Not only is it durable, but its vitality is also too strong. Kale thought for a moment, and the hammer in his left hand disappeared. He waved his right hand in the air, and an item card was pulled out between his fingers. He looked down and said, "Big green guy. After Tawny forces it out of the ground, help control it." Roar. Hulk was running wildly, looking up and roaring in dissatisfaction. Even Bruce himself could not control it, let alone make it listen to battle orders. Swoosh. Kale summoned his physical body, and a golden fire plate appeared in his hands. The fire in the fire plate was burning fiercely as usual. Hulk's roar stopped abruptly. Its neck shrank, and the anger in its green eyes was replaced by fear. At this moment, it recalled the fear of being roasted by the eternal fire. Boom! The ground trembled slightly, as if Iron Man had encountered the abomination underground. Kale stopped in the air above the ground, holding the golden fire plate with both hands, and waited for Tawny to force the abomination out of the ground. After the eternal fire appeared, Hulk fell silent. It did not seem to lose control of its anger. Boom! The ground suddenly cracked open in the tremor. Along with the dust and gravel flying all over the sky, a figure was ejected from the ground in a sorry state. Kale was in the air, his hands raised high. He was about to pin the fire plate on the figure that was forced out of the ground, but the figure had the ability to fly and stopped in the air. Iron Man looked at the fire plate that was less than half a meter long and was shocked. He quickly waved his hands and said awkwardly, "Godfather, it's me." Kale silently put away the fire plate, and his scarlet eyes looked coldly at the ground again. Hulk lifted its leg and stomped on the crack in the ground. The ground within a 10-meter radius collapsed instantly, and an invisible shockwave spread underground. Roar! The ground shook, and another crack appeared in the ground. A huge green figure was forced out of it. Chapter 255. Abomination was very depressed. God seemed to have been joking with him. Originally, as the world's top soldier, he received the general's summons and wanted to shine in the mission of capturing the target hostage. As a result, he met Hulk, who had just appeared and was seriously injured and dying. After getting the super soldier potion, he transformed into a new super soldier and confidently went to Hulk to avenge his shame. As a result, after being punched by Hulk, he was seriously injured and dying again. Finally, he found the Gamma laboratory, injected Hulk's serum, and became an abomination with endless power. He regained his confidence and wanted to defeat the symbol of peace and Hulk to prove himself. As a result, before he could play, he was beaten to the ground by Kale and others. It is said that when God closes your door, he will open a window for you. What they don't know is that outside the open window is a cliff. When I escape from this city, I will come back to settle accounts with you one by one. Abomination dug a hole with both hands, with a head full of bruises and wounds, and could not stop thinking angrily. Everyone knew what happened after that. ZZ. The golden fire plate covered the head of Abomination. Kale flapped his wings back and pressed it straight to the ground below. In just a moment, the eternal fire raged out of the plate and enveloped Abomination's strong and huge body along the surface of his body. The seemingly ordinary flame, when burning Abomination's body, surged with a hair-raising aura of destruction. Ta-ta-ta. Hulk turned and ran, leaving a safe distance of dozens of meters, sitting at the back of the bus with lingering fear. This is... Iron Man was also surprised. He took off his steel mask with his left hand and landed on the ground with the engine of his feet extinguished. He took a few steps forward and looked at Abomination, who was wrapped in the eternal fire and constantly screaming. At first, Abomination still had the intention to resist. Kale pressed the bottom of the golden fire plate hard, pressed the plate against the other side, and used the plate to block the raging eternal fire. In front of the eternal fire, which exuded a destructive aura, even as the god of fire, he felt unusually hot because of his uneasiness. No! Surrounded by the eternal fire, the Abomination powerlessly begged for mercy. But soon, even its begging became weak, until only the sound of burning flames could be heard. Kale estimated that it was about time. He raised the golden plate, and the eternal flame automatically flowed back into the golden plate. On the ground, only a huge and terrifying burning shadow was left, and some black ashes drifted with the wind. The Abomination, a powerful creature with a rare purple card, was burned to ashes by the eternal flame. Kale's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time he realized that the eternal fire was not a divine tool that he could control. If he used it inappropriately, he would be playing with fire. Don't burn it. The flames were still burning as before, but the sound of the abomination's painful howls could be faintly heard from the fire core of the golden fire disk. Kale's expression changed slightly. He stared at the fire of eternity on the plate. A face of hatred flashed across the flickering flames, like a desperate ghost in hell begging for mercy. The soul of the abomination was in the eternal fire. This thought flashed through Kale's mind. He immediately turned the eternal fire into a card and stored the card in the card space. The eternal fire was too mysterious. He had to study it carefully in the future. That monster is dead? Tawny looked at the burning shadow on the ground and asked. Obviously, it's dead. Kale looked around and asked curiously, where's Hulk? Seems to be hiding. Tawny shrugged. Here. Behind a car a dozen meters away, Bruce was half naked. He lifted his loose pants and waved helplessly at the two of them. Kale turned around and said calmly, pretend you don't know him. Let's go. I agree. Tawny nodded and put on his iron mask. At this moment, in a hidden single room in a modern building on Central Street in New York City. Whether it was the size of the room, the decoration style, the bed, chairs, or furniture, they were all Western style. Everything here seemed to have stopped before 1945. On a single bed in the single room, a handsome and tall blonde youth was lying on the bed. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt and long pants. His face was full of righteousness, but his body and mind were still in a long sleep. He was in an old decorated room and didn't feel out of place at all. He was like a character sealed in a historical scroll. A cool breeze blew in through the window. Warm golden sunlight shone into the room, making the room brighter and brighter. The three-bladed fan was still turning slowly and silently. The radio antenna on the old table was starting to rustle. The two of them are still facing each other. They moved together. He stepped forward, raised his hand, and stabbed forward. His sword drew an arc. The lieutenant lowered his body, lowered his knees, raised his shield, and blocked the sword. On the radio, the announcer was narrating the news in an exaggerated tone. Frowning, the blond youth opened his eyes and got up from the bed. He looked around the room in confusion. The two of them continued to fight in a stalemate. The radio was still broadcasting. The blond youth's eyes fell on it, and his breathing quickened. Before he passed out, his teammates' calm reminder, the roar of the fighter jet out of control, the collapse of the sea and the iceberg, the memories came back to him like waves. Creak. The door opened. A woman in an old officer's uniform walked into the room and greeted him softly. Good afternoon, Captain. Where is this? The blond youth's breathing quickened. He frowned and his muscles tensed up subconsciously. Before the woman could respond, the radio's announcement ended. Sword and shield collided. The two of them are tied. The blond youth couldn't help but stand up. His eyes were sharp and dignified. He said in a deep voice, I remember that this was a battle between me and my comrade in the military base. The result wasn't a tie. He won. He noticed that the radio's announcement was fake and the woman's evasive gaze. The blond youth stood up quickly. He was as agile as a cheetah. He violently kicked open the door and rushed out. He wanted to escape from here and meet up with Kale and Carter in the military base. The wooden door shattered. Outside the single room was a large, modern hall on the first floor. Many employees in black suits were coming and going. The original room was like an isolated research room. Everything inside was fake. When the golden-haired young man rushed into the hall, everyone's eyes fell on him. Emergency alert, all agents, attention. The broadcast sounded in the hall. The agents were alerted and rushed toward the blond youth. Pa, pa, pa. The blond youth rushed out of the door. He waved his strong arms and knocked down all the agents who came near. No one could stop him. The blond youth rushed out of the building called S.H.E.L.D. and escaped into the busy street. Car horns sounded everywhere. Modern buildings stood in great numbers. Colorful big screens showed singing and dancing. An advanced scene that had never been seen before came into view. Chapter 256. The space warship landed on the rooftop of the Imperial Luxury Building. Kale was the first to walk out, followed by Yutong and the other members of the Alliance. Bruce and his girlfriend chose to stay in California, so only Tawny and Natasha returned. Godfather. The ion accelerator is still being built in my office, so I'll take my leave first, Tawny said as he hugged his helmet. Kale nodded in agreement. Tawny immediately put on his steel helmet, and the Iron Man flew out of the building at supersonic speed towards the Stark Industries building more than 10 kilometers away. Natasha hesitated for a moment and said, "Master, it's about Bruce Banner." "I know what you're worried about." Kale smiled and said after some thought, "Add a condition, Bruce must move to New York within a week." "Okay." Natasha's eyes lit up, and she agreed immediately. Although Bruce had joined the Avengers and had a legitimate identity, no one could guarantee when Hulk would come out. Once Hulk went berserk and caused social unrest, S.H.E.L.D. would have to take the blame. However, they couldn't monitor Hulk as a prisoner anymore, so they had to control it well. Natasha had been thinking about this problem since the beginning, but she didn't expect Kale to solve it so easily. Yes. Bruce was in New York, so Hulk could only be more obedient. After all, New York had a symbol of peace. Natasha looked at the man in front of her and sighed inwardly. With Kale's return, not only Family Cal, but also S.H.E.L.D. and the Avengers seemed to have a pillar of support. They were full of confidence in everything they did. This was something that others couldn't give them. Then I'll head to S.H.E.L.D. headquarters first. Natasha paused as her phone vibrated in her pocket, as if there was an urgent message to report. Kale waved his hand and led Yutong to the elevator. "I'm the deputy director." Natasha answered the phone. Soon, she heard an important message and quickly put down her phone. "Master. Please wait a moment." Kale turned around in surprise and saw Natasha's beautiful eyes filled with pleasant surprise. He took a deep breath and said, "An old friend of yours has woken up." S.H.E.L.D. branch office, 3rd floor lobby. This time, Kale did not bring Yutong with him. Instead, he chose to come alone. Along the way, his usually cold and emotionless state of mind after becoming a god had actually stirred up a lot of passionate emotions. Kale suppressed the long-lost excitement in his heart and opened the main door of the lobby. He looked at the sofa through the window and saw Fry chatting with a blond young man. At the same time, the two of them also noticed that someone had arrived. They stopped talking and turned to look at him. The blond young man's body trembled and he stood up from the sofa. He had a lot to say, but in the end, he just said helplessly, "Brother, I think I slept for a long time." "Yeah. Steve, you're too good at sleeping." Kale could not help but laugh. In the blink of an eye, half a century had passed. For Steve. He was probably still in the middle and late stages of World War II, when the two of them fought side by side against the Red Skull in a fighter jet out of control. But when he opened his eyes again, everything had changed. The world and people had changed beyond recognition. "After so many years, Fry has aged, but you're still the same. It's just that your hair." Steve's gaze moved up, and his focus fell on Kale's shiny silver hair. "You were lazy when you slept, but I didn't. I walked all the way to this day." Kale spread his hands and made a rare joke, but this joke contained many difficulties. Ever since Steve's plane crash, he had suffered too much. From Earth to the universe, from modern times to modern times, there were so many that it would take half a day to finish talking about them. Ahem, you two old comrades, take your time to chat. I'll go get you some wine. Fry rubbed his chin, feeling that his existence was a little redundant, so he tactfully found an excuse to leave the lobby and close the door. The lobby fell into silence. Cale walked to the opposite side of Steve, sat down on the sofa, and crossed his legs. Steve smiled and broke the silence. I just learned something from Fry. I heard that you ended the World War II war and became a symbol of peace. The symbol of peace is just a title. I just did what I thought I should do. Cale changed the topic and said calmly, also, what you wanted to ask me in particular shouldn't be about that, right? Steve looked at him and said with a deep expression, yes, it's about Agent Carter. I went on the date you mentioned. Cale's words were concise. He paused and continued, I'm sorry about what happened after that. I didn't notice that she was sick, and it happened that she left Earth because of her own health problems. Steve's eyes dimmed. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. Cale said softly, Steve. I didn't fulfill your orders to protect Carter. If you blame me, I can give you a few punches to vent your anger. The main problem was me. How can I blame you? Steve sighed. He loosened his clenched fists. I thought I could help her, protect her, and fulfill her wish. What a pity. This pity was full of bitterness and helplessness. Cale fell silent. He recalled Steve's instructions before he died, Carter's invitation to dance and kiss, and now Steve's words. He vaguely knew that he had done something wrong and missed some things. Those things, once missed, could never be made up for, and would become a permanent regret in his life. In the hall. Two old people, in their 80s or 90s, silently recalled the past for a long time. Cale. I want to go to a few places. Steve's eyes regained their brightness as he said in a deep voice. Okay. I'll go with you. Cale didn't ask what the places were and agreed. This was the tacit understanding between the two of them. It hadn't changed after decades. 5 minutes later. The main door of the hall opened, and Fry walked in with a bottle of wine. Where is he? When he saw that the hall was empty, he was puzzled. Suddenly, the roar of an engine came from outside the window. At the entrance of the SHELD branch building. Two young men in leather jackets and jeans, wearing hats and sunglasses, were riding a modern motorcycle. They sped into the road one after another and left for an unknown distance. Fry, the family head and the captain. Natasha's report came from Frey's hidden earpiece. Fry watched the motorcycle leave and said firmly, all right, let Cale take him to get used to the modern world. On the road. Cale sped up and caught up with the motorcycle in front of him. He asked curiously, why are you using a motorcycle? It's very convenient to travel by plane now. I still like motorcycles. They're very fast. Steve shrugged. The strong wind blowing against his face made him happy. His depressed and sad mood had been thrown away by quite a bit. Okay. Cale was speechless. The speed of a motorcycle? Please, even if he used Venom's flight mode, he would be miles ahead. By the way. There's something I forgot to tell you. Kyle remembered something and said aloud. What is it? In the face of Steve's question, Cale calmly replied. Chapter 257. In the suburbs of New York. Something seemed to have happened in the main house of the Carter family. More than a dozen members of the family, men and women, old and young, had gathered in the hall. Their faces were filled with sadness and sorrow. Their eyes were red and they were crying in front of a dark wooden coffin. Virum. Suddenly, the sound of a motorcycle engine came from outside the door. It came closer and closer and finally stopped at the door of the house. Is there anyone else who hasn't arrived? A middle-aged man wiped his tears and asked in surprise. The family members in the living room looked around and couldn't figure out what was going on. They looked at the door with tears in their eyes and saw two tall figures approaching. "Excuse me, is there anyone here?" the young man in the lead asked. "Who is it? Don't disturb us if you don't have anything important to do." The middle-aged man was still sad and replied rudely. "Is this Page Carter's house?" The blond young man walked to the door and took off his sunglasses. He was also stunned when he saw the funeral scene in the living room. "I told you, now," the middle-aged man was angry and wanted to drive the intruder away. However, a young woman grabbed his arm and said, "Father, wait. You are." Ellie Carter wiped away the tears on her face with her sleeves. Her hazy and moist eyes widened as she looked at the handsome and righteous blonde youth in front of her in shock. Compared to the symbol of peace, Steve looked exactly the same as he did in the past, like a legend straight out of a war memorial film. Ellie was not the only one who recognized the blonde young man. Many people in the living room also opened their mouths in shock. "Ellie. Since you are here, it means that we are not in the wrong place." As a cold voice sounded, another silver-haired young man walked to the door from behind the blonde young man. "The symbol of peace, Captain America. My God, am I dreaming?" Ellie was stunned and murmured to herself. The two heroes who changed the course of World War II appeared in the same frame in the modern world. "Are you guys holding a funeral?" Cale raised his eyebrows and felt that they had come at the wrong time. "Yes. My grandfather, Marty Carter, passed away this morning. His body has been cremated and we're preparing to bury him in his coffin." Ellie replied sadly. "Marty. Is he Peggy's younger brother?" Steve asked with a sigh. He had heard Paige talk about her brother before, when Marty was at school. She said he was very naughty. But in the blink of an eye, the old man had naturally died of old age. "Yes." Ellie nodded sadly. Cale and Steve looked at each other and understood each other's meaning. Steve said in a deep voice, "Let's send him off." Cale nodded at the same time. Everyone in the hall was stunned. Even their sadness was gone. The reporter, Ellie, was speechless. To be buried by two national heroes, even the president of a country would not receive such extravagant treatment. How would they know that this was a way for the two old men to make up for a certain woman? Half an hour later, Cale and Steve carried the wooden coffin on their shoulders and walked with the Carter family to the nearby cemetery. After completing the burial procedure, the Carter family members stood in front of the new grave and mourned with tears in their eyes. "That is?" Cale's sharp eyes looked at a place in the cemetery. There was a grave there. The old tombstone was yellowed, and the grave was covered with grass and green plants. It looked like it had been there for a few years. Ellie replied, "It's Grandma Peggy's grave." Cale and Steve were silent for a while. The two of them came to the grave. After so many years, even the stone tombstone had traces of wind and rain. Only the smile of the beauty in the black and white photo was still there. Steve suppressed his emotions. With tears in his eyes, he began to clean the weeds and dust on the grave. Cale did not feel sad. After so many wars, coupled with the fact that his body had become a god, his fragile emotions as a human had weakened. Only his incomparably tenacious human rationality had strengthened and survived. However, he still took out a bouquet of flowers that were still full of life from the card space, as well as a few bottles of top-grade spirits from the old era. "I remember that when I drank with you in the past, Carter would always scold me when she caught me drinking. No, I rarely drink. It's mainly because you insisted that I accompany you. We agreed to kill that red skull and go back to drink at the banquet. I still failed to keep my promise. It's not your fault, really. Cale and Steve sat in front of Peggy's grave and chatted about the past of World War II. They picked up the bottles and poured the spirits into their mouths. The spicy wine wet their collars and stimulated their eyes to turn red. Their true feelings were revealed. "Peggy, she likes you," Steve suddenly exclaimed, a little drunk from the wine. Cale's heart trembled slightly. He opened his mouth and could only say softly, "You're drunk." "I'm not drunk." Steve laughed. He lay back on the grass and gulped down the alcohol. "You're drunk." "I'm not drunk." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "I think I'm drunk." The sun was setting. The two young men were drinking in front of the cemetery and talking about the past that no one could understand. After the members of Carter's family finished their moment of silence, they began to leave the cemetery and return home. They did not dare to talk to Cale and Steve. Halfway back, Ellie's father suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Do you think that the man who killed Aunt Peggy was one of them just now?" Another older family member nodded. "It's possible. Otherwise, why didn't they announce it back then?" "Father, uncle. What are you talking about?" Ellie, whose occupational disease was acting up, approached and asked curiously. "It's about your Grandma Peggy." Ellie's father shook his head and said, "Your Grandma Peggy resigned from the army at a young age. How could she have died of illness?" Back then, there was a family secret that only the older generation of Carter's family knew about. "Grandma Peggy didn't die of illness?" Ellie almost exclaimed. "Of course not. Rather than saying that she was sick, it's better to say that she damaged her body for a man." Ellie's father stopped halfway and was unwilling to say more. "For a man?" Ellie whispered. She felt that she had accidentally dug out a family secret. The sun set and night fell in the cemetery. Cale opened his eyes and circulated his divine power. The remaining alcohol in his body was completely dissolved. "It's time to go back." He patted Steve, who was lying on the side. "We've only come to the first place. There's still the second place." Steve shook his head and gradually stood up. "Then let's go to the second place." Cale supported him with one hand. The two walked out of the pitch-black cemetery. After a while, you're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.